Sansa stood at the edge of a curved balcony gazing out over the Vale of Arryn. The winds from the mountains carried the crisp scent of pine, and the faint echoes of a falcon's cry filled the air. Snow dusted the high peaks, glimmering in the afternoon sun. The sky was a brilliant azure that seemed endless, a reflection of her possibilities if she dared to seize them. She wore a warm cloak lined with fur, for the winds here could bite through the thickest of fabrics. Though she felt a shiver, it was not entirely from the cold. A sense of inevitability prickled beneath her skin. Whatever future she had, it was now inseparable from these mountains and the paths winding through them. She had been told once that the Vale was impregnable, a fortress of nature and pride. High above the treacherous mountain passes sat the Eyrie, a castle known for its loftiness and the swirling mists that clung to its stone walls. Once, all of this would have seemed like a prison. Now she recognized an opportunity. She was Sansa Stark, daughter of House Stark and rightful heir to the north in her own way, yet she remained disguised to the outside world, still going by Elaine Stone, the supposed bastard daughter of Petyr Baelish. That thin veneer of identity had protected her thus far. But the words echoed in her mind, "Winter is coming." She was tired of waiting for salvation that never arrived, of letting others shape her destiny. It was time to become more than a chess piece. Petyr Baelish had taught her so many lessons: how to survive, how to observe the world with a keen eye, how to press an advantage at the right moment. Yet he was also the man who had orchestrated her entrapment here, feeding her illusions about safety in the Vale. Sansa suspected his ambitions ran deeper than any vow of protection he'd made in her ear. When she first arrived, she had not questioned his designs too deeply. Fear and grief had clouded her thoughts. Now, those very lessons he'd given her were pushing her to look at him anew. She would not remain beholden to him. She would not remain powerless. Her father's words resounded in her memory: "Look with your eyes, listen with your ears, see the truth behind every smile." So she observed, learned, and waited. The Eyries' halls were filled with a quiet tension. Lord Robert Arryn, the young and sickly Lord of the Vale, resided in his chambers, doted upon by maesters and serving girls. He was never far from one crisis or another, most often his own frail health and his mercurial mood. Petyr, ever the cunning manipulator, had seized authority as Robert's protector, skillfully turning lords and ladies to his will. Yet the Vale was not so easily kept under any man's thumb. The Lords Declarant, a group of formidable Vale lords who were suspicious of Baelish, had made a show of resisting his hold. Petyr had placated them for the time being, using gold and silver tongues, but the uneasy alliance hung by a thread. Sansa knew that if she wanted to rule here, truly rule, she would have to do better than simply reaping the fruits of Petyr's manipulations. She would have to become a leader in her own right. Over the weeks, she had quietly garnered the trust of the servants and guards, forging a genuine rapport with them, something Petyr had never bothered to do beyond the superficial. A sense of loyalty built up around her, though few openly recognized her as Sansa Stark. They knew her as Elaine, kind, gentle, and yet sharper than she let on. She listened to their troubles, offered a soothing word, and remembered every piece of gossip and rumor that might serve her. A whispered conversation in the laundry rooms about the Royces' dissatisfaction, a stray comment from a stable boy regarding the finances of Lord Grafton, or the half-joking remarks of a steward about Maester Coleman's daily difficulties with Robert's health. Each bit was a puzzle piece. She began to see the shape of the larger mosaic, how the Vale lords might be swayed if approached with the right combination of courtesy, empathy, and, when necessary, subtle intimidation. She stepped back from the balcony and moved through the open doors into her chamber. The walls were bare gray stone, but a plush rug in the shape of a falcon was spread before the hearth. Embers glowed in the fireplace, lending a scant warmth that the high winds sought to steal away. On a small table lay a single candle, flickering in a slight draught. Next to it were letters sealed with the sigils of various Vale houses: a flying falcon for House Arryn, a bronze armor for House Royce, a sun and moon crest for House Linderley, and more. She had read them all, gleaning the subtext in each line. Alliances were fragile, and no one lord truly dominated the rest. They were united by shared tradition, by a fierce pride in their mountainous domain, and by a desire to protect it from all outside threats. She took up a new letter that had arrived that morning. The wax seal bore a familiar mockingbird, the mark of Petyr Baelish. He was in Gull Town, supposedly on some business to secure trade alliances. Sansa suspected he was trying to funnel money from new partners, possibly overseas, to tighten his control on the Vale. She cracked the wax and read his words, glowing remarks about how the Vale's future would be prosperous if only certain rebellious lords could be brought to heel, and how Elaine should maintain her careful role at Robert's side until his return. A polite request backed by the unsubtle threat that any deviance from his plan would bring disaster. She felt her anger simmer but put on the practiced mask of calm. She had been wearing masks for so long now that showing her true self almost felt like a danger. And yet she knew the day was coming when that mask would shatter, revealing Sansa Stark. Northern daughter, cunning pupil, a woman who had survived Joffrey's court, Lannister plots, and the tyranny of the Iron Throne's corrupt heart. She set the letter aside. She had better things to do than dwell on Baelish's manipulations. Tonight, there would be a small feast in the High Hall of the Eyrie, meant to celebrate the naming day of a minor knight from a lesser-known branch of House Corbray. Peter was absent, and that alone would change the atmosphere. She would attend, playing her role of gracious hostess in Robert's stead. And in the corners of the hall, alliances would be tested, gambles placed, secrets whispered. She resolved to be present in every sense of the word, to prove that while Peter might be the official protector, the soul of the Eyrie lay in her hands. Night fell in shimmering waves, the stars glistening like shards of ice over the Vale. The mountain air became even colder, biting at exposed skin. Guards with torches lit the high passages, guiding knights and ladies to the hall. Sansa arrived, her hair braided in a style reminiscent of her mother's Tully heritage, long and looping, with subtle silver pins shaped like falcon wings. She wore a gown of pale blue velvet, trimmed with white fur at the collar. She looked every inch a graceful noblewoman, though none but a select few guessed her true lineage. The hall was a cavernous space, with a series of tapestries along the walls depicting the history of House Arryn. The first Arryn Lord, Ardes the Falcon Knight, bringing unity to the Vale. The great battles fought against the mountain clans, the forging of alliances through marriage. The tapestries shimmered under the glow of dozens of torches. Minstrels stood on a raised platform, playing a gentle tune on lute and flute. Stewards hurried about with pitchers of wine and trays of roasted game. At the high table, Robert Arryn sat uncomfortably, picking at his food. His eyes looked half-focused, as though he longed to be anywhere else. But no outburst came tonight, for which Sansa was silently grateful. She mingled among the guests, adopting that serene smile that had become her hallmark. Lord Yohn Royce was present, wearing the bronze armor sigil on his doublet. He had a proud, stern face, and regarded her with a certain guarded respect, as though he could sense hidden depths behind her polite courtesies. Lady Waynwood was in attendance too, flanked by two of her sons, both handsome and stoic. Several knights from the smaller houses had come as well. Sansa stopped to exchange pleasantries, praising the excellent honeyed wine from the southern Vale. She noted every change in expression, every look that passed between the lords. The feast was a tapestry of politics, each thread connected to the others. During a lull in the music, Sansa felt a light tug on her sleeve. She turned to see Sir Michael Redfort, who bowed politely. "My lady," he began, hesitating as though uncertain how to address her. "Lady Elaine." "Your presence is requested by Lord Robert. He grows weary and wishes to retire early." She offered a gracious nod and allowed Sir Michael to lead her to the high table. Robert was indeed yawning, his eyes half-lidded. He always had that trembling in his hands, and he had spilled some ale on the tablecloth. "Elaine," Robert muttered, "I'm going to my bedchamber now. I want you to say good night to me." He fidgeted in his seat, glancing around at the assembled lords and ladies who might overhear. "But maybe not here." Sansa gave him a reassuring smile. "Of course, my lord." She gestured for one of the maids to guide Robert back to his chambers. "I'll come speak with you before you sleep." He nodded, relieved, and rose from his seat. It was difficult for him to maintain the composure of a ruling lord in front of so many watchful eyes, and he seemed grateful for the escape. The hush among the nobility lifted once he was gone. Some returned to quiet conversation, others watched Sansa with curiosity. She offered a soft farewell smile and let Robert be taken away by the servants and maester. Then she resumed her rounds among the guests, ensuring no one felt slighted or ignored. In the midst of conversation with Lord Nestor Royce, who oversaw the Gates of the Moon, she sensed a presence behind her, a tall man with fine features dressed in a doublet of teal embroidered with golden falcons. She recognized him before she turned by the faint cologne he wore. Ser Lyn Corbray, whose famed sword, Lady Forlorn, was said to thirst for blood as much as its owner did. Lyn Corbray was known for his unpredictability, a man quick to anger but also fiercely skilled. Baelish had once claimed that Lyn was secretly in his employ, that certain gold had passed hands to secure his fealty. Sansa, for her part, had never entirely trusted him. Yet she offered a perfectly measured smile as she faced him. Ser Lyn, she said, dipping her head in courteous greeting. I'm so pleased you could join us. He inclined his head, eyes sharp. I would not miss it. My cousin's naming day is an occasion that calls for celebration, though I fear we have seen more interesting feasts in better times. Lord Nestor excused himself politely, perhaps sensing some tension in the air. The crowd shifted, leaving Sansa and Lyn Corbray something resembling privacy near a corner column. Sansa watched him, noticing the way his hand rested on the pommel of Lady Forlorn, almost possessively. He wore a half-smile as though everything amused him. I'm sure you find all times interesting, sir, Sansa ventured. If I may say, the Vale is safer with knights like you in its service. His smile turned sardonic. Flattery, my lady? Surely you know my reputation. I have a fondness for chaos, they say. That I live for the moment steel meets steel, and the rest be damned. She feigned an airy laugh. A certain bit of chaos can keep life from growing dull. Then, lowering her voice, she added, but even chaos must have an order behind it, an intent. Wouldn't you agree? He studied her. Sometimes, yes. Other times, steel is steel and blood is blood. Some are like you, playing their gentle games with smiles. Others prefer more direct methods. He shrugged, glancing around the hall. What do you prefer, my lady? She let a thoughtful pause stretch. I prefer to keep my friends close, she said at last, and to understand my enemies before they even know me. Wise words. His gaze flicked over her face as though he might peel back her layers. Sansa remained composed, offering nothing beyond an enigmatic courtesy. I wonder if Lord Baelish taught you that, or if you learned it in King's Landing. Sansa withheld any hint of discomfort. I have learned much from many people, but in the end, we must rely on ourselves, don't you think? He chuckled low. Indeed. With that, he offered a curt bow and drifted away into the crowd, leaving Sansa to wonder which side of the game he truly favored. She suspected that Lyn Corbray's loyalty lay wherever his ambition pointed him at any given moment. If so, he might be turned to her advantage or become a dangerous foe. When the feast ended, she paid a brief visit to Robert Arryn, who was already half asleep, muttering complaints about his headache and the cold wind. She soothed him with a promise that she would see him in the morning, then left him to the care of the maester. Returning to her own chamber, she found the wind had snuffed her candle. In darkness, she slipped out of her gown and into a heavier robe, stirring the hearth fire until it flared again. But her mind did not let her rest. She moved to a small desk by the window and lit another candle, spreading out a piece of parchment. In careful script, she began composing a letter. My Lord Royce, I wish to express my gratitude for your support of our young Lord Robert and for the generosity you have shown the Eyrie. As you know, stability in the Vale is dear to my heart. She wrote carefully, crafting each line as a piece of a puzzle. She would dispatch the letter in the morning, sealing it with the Falcon and Moon seal of the Eyrie, as if on Robert's behalf. But every word would be hers. If things went according to plan, Lord Royce's sense of honor and his fondness for Robert, and perhaps the memory of Sansa's own mother's lineage, would bind him closer. Satisfied at last, she sealed the letter, then stared into the flickering candle flame. She was forging alliances quietly, skillfully. There would come a day when the Vale would see her not as a bystander but as a leader. She was more than a Lane Stone. She was Sansa Stark of Winterfell. With that thought, she doused the candle, letting darkness enfold her at last. Days passed, turning into weeks, each marked by a swirl of rumor and negotiation. Winter was creeping ever closer, though in the Vale the snows had yet to choke off the passes. Merchants, knights, and even a few traveling performers passed through the gates of the moon, bringing news of strife in the Riverlands and fresh turmoil at King's Landing. Rumors spread that the Iron Throne was low on gold, that the Lannisters and Tyrells bickered behind closed doors, that the North was still a land of uncertain loyalties after the horrors of war. Sansa gleaned whatever she could, but she no longer felt that pang of fear at the name Lannister. She was beyond their immediate reach here, and she was finding her strength at last. She began to make subtle changes at the Eyrie in Peter's absence. The head steward, who had been in Baelish's pocket, found himself quietly reassigned when discrepancies in the Eyrie's accounts came to light, discrepancies Sansa herself had discovered. He was replaced by a middle-aged man named Branwen, who came from a respectable family in Gulltown. Sansa had made sure Branwen understood that honesty and diligence were his safest path forward. She also improved the conditions of the guards, ensuring they had better rations. A small generosity, but one that earned her respect. The castle's staff began to see her as something more than a figurehead for Lord Baelish. In time, she was ready to take a larger step. She requested a formal gathering of the Vale's principal lords and ladies at the Eyrie, a courtesy meeting to discuss the approach of winter and the measures needed to ensure the Vale remained fed and secure. Officially, this was done in Robert's name, but Robert was hardly in a position to orchestrate anything, and everyone knew it. Yet the invitation carried a respectful tone, and given the Eyrie's significance and Robert's nominal leadership, the lords agreed. They came, some with retinues of knights, some with families, and they convened in the Eyrie's grand meeting chamber, a circular room with a high ceiling and arching windows that offered panoramic views of the surrounding mountains. Sansa stood by Robert's side, a comforting hand on his shoulder. At times, she whispered a suggestion in his ear, prompting him to speak. The lords waited, scrutinizing them both. Yohn Royce was there, Lady Anya Waynwood, Lord Belmore, Lord Grafton of Gulltown, the Reforts, and even the younger Corbrays. Lyn Corbray lurked near the back, arms folded. The room buzzed with subdued tension. "We are gathered," Robert began in a shaky voice, "to talk about winter. The Vale must be strong." He stumbled, and Sansa stepped forward, seamlessly taking over without seeming to overshadow him. "My lords, winter's approach is no secret, nor are the difficulties we face," she said, her voice clear. "We must consider our grain stores, the readiness of our knights against any raids by the mountain clans, and the need for stable trade routes so that we are not isolated. I have conferred with Maester Coleman, and he advises that we fortify our grain reserves. The Eyrie alone cannot hold enough. We must see that all our major holdings in the Vale are well stocked and that supplies can be shared if one region faces hardship." Her words carried a tone of authority, and she felt the weight of so many gazes upon her. Sansa noted how Lord Royce nodded thoughtfully while others exchanged glances. No outright objection arose, for what she said was reasonable. Over the next hour, they hashed out details of how to coordinate supply lines from Gulltown's port to the interior. The gates controlling the high roads would need more resources. Sansa guided the discussion, letting the lords debate finer points, but gently steering them toward consensus. When a dispute arose, Lord Belmore bristling at the suggestion that his garrison was insufficient, she deftly offered a compromise, suggesting that some knights from the Eyrie be stationed there, bringing more manpower without slighting his authority. By the end of the assembly, a tentative plan was in place. More significantly, the lords saw the role Sansa played, how she mediated and organized. Though outwardly she still appeared as a Lane Stone, a kind of stand-in, they could not deny her effectiveness. As the gathering broke up, Lord Royce approached her. He bowed slightly, a gesture of respect. "You speak with wisdom," he said. "It is good to see the Eyrie guided by a steady hand. We all miss Lord Baelish's presence, of course." He said it in a carefully neutral tone. Sansa dipped her head. "Of course, my lord. We anticipate his return soon. Until then, I merely do what I can to help Lord Robert." Lord Royce's eyes narrowed slightly, as though suspecting there was more to her words than humility. "Indeed. Well, I have no doubt that you have young Robert's best interests at heart. If ever you need the counsel of a Royce, remember my door is open." She thanked him kindly, and he departed. The rest of the lords likewise took their leave, each with varying degrees of courtesy and hidden intention. Alone in the chamber now, except for a few servants tidying up, Sansa looked over at Robert. He had grown restless again, tugging at his cloak. "Elaine," he whined, "it's done now, yes? All this talk makes my head hurt." She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Yes, Robert. We're finished for today. Why not rest in your chambers? The maester will bring you a tonic for your head." He nodded, relieved. He headed out, escorted by 2 guards, leaving Sansa alone by the large windows. The wind rattled the glass. She took a moment, gazing at the Vale's peaks rising like silent sentinels. She felt as though each step she took was climbing a mountain as well, a slow, treacherous ascent, but an ascent nonetheless. She could not afford to falter. In the coming weeks, the improvement in the Eyrie's governance became evident. More robust patrols were sent out, the mountain passes were guarded, and the planning for winter gained momentum. Lords who had once been openly hostile to Petyr Baelish's control found themselves more inclined to cooperate with the Aeries' new direction, though perhaps they simply found Sansa's approach less abrasive. She was careful not to overstep. She did not make any grand proclamations or attempt to usurp Robert's seat. Instead, she worked behind the scenes, sending letters, forging personal connections with key households. A young Waynwood was promised a place among the Aeries squires. A knight from House Coldwater was offered a prestigious position leading a newly formed mounted patrol. Through small gestures, she wove a network of gratitude and obligation. Yet not all was smooth. Tensions persisted. The Corbrays were restive. Lynn Corbray openly mocked certain decisions, though whether it was genuine sentiment or a performance on Baelish's behalf was unclear. Lord Belmore continued to protest any perceived slight to his domain. Gossip circulated that Petyr Baelish might soon return and that he would not be pleased to find someone else steering the Vale's course. Sansa forced herself to remain calm, to anticipate Baelish's reactions. She had come too far to shrink from him now. Eventually, the day came when word arrived that Petyr Baelish had landed in Gulltown. The messenger's arrival caused a stir among the staff. In hushed voices, they discussed what his return would mean. Sansa thanked the messenger politely, her smile unyielding. In private, she allowed herself one trembling moment, taking a breath by the window. Then she composed herself, her mind racing. She had to be ready. She would not cower before him this time. It was late evening when Petyr Baelish arrived at the Eyrie. He came with a small entourage, some mercenaries dressed in dark cloaks, and a few trusted knights. Sansa went to greet him in the courtyard, accompanied by a handful of guards and Robert Arryn. The torchlight flickered across Baelish's face as he dismounted. The mocking smile on his lips was as she remembered, sly, knowing, dangerous. "Lord Protector," she said formally, lowering her head in greeting. "Welcome home." He extended a hand to Robert, who took it hesitantly. "My lord, you've grown since I last saw you. Healthy as ever, I trust." Robert made a small noise, something between a grunt and an acknowledgement, then quickly excused himself, complaining of the cold. The guards led him away to the warmth of the inner hall. That left Sansa and Petyr facing each other in the courtyard, the torches highlighting the tension in the air. He studied her, his eyes flicking up and down, taking in her refined attire, the silver falcon pins in her braided hair. There was something akin to admiration in his gaze, but also calculation. "You've done well in my absence, Elaine," he said softly. "I hear the Vale is running like a well-oiled machine." She maintained her composure. "I merely followed the directions you left, my lord. I'm glad if I could be of service." His smile was thin. "Indeed. Let's go inside. I'm weary from the road." She accompanied him to his private solar, which was warmed by a blazing hearth. 2 guards remained outside at his order, ensuring their privacy. As soon as the door closed, he turned to her, removing his gloves and placing them on a small table. "You've been busy," he said, voice low, almost whispery. "I've received reports of new patrols, changes in staff, letters sent under the Aeries seal. It seems you've not only followed my directions, but expanded upon them." She lifted her chin. "With respect, I believed it was necessary. The Vale could not remain idle, especially with winter so near. And Lord Robert, he needs strong guidance." Petyr stepped closer, eyeing her with something like amusement. Elaine, so dutiful." He paused, then brushed a stray curl of her hair aside, a gesture he had done before that always made her skin crawl. "I trust you've done everything in my name and for the benefit of our cause." She looked at him steadily. "I have done what I must to preserve the Vale, Lord Baelish." He cocked his head. "The Vale, yes, and yourself, I imagine." Sansa felt her heart pounding, but she kept it from her face. "I am only as secure as the boy I protect. If anything threatens Robert Arryn, we both lose everything." He chuckled quietly, spoken like a true player of this game. "You have learned so very well." He rested a hand lightly on her arm. "It pleases me to see you step into such a role. There may come a time when your talents will serve us both even more. Now, we must discuss how to proceed. I have pressing matters in Gulltown, but the Vale's future is here. My sweet Elaine, I think we can do great things together." She carefully extracted her arm. Yes, my lord. We should speak of this tomorrow, perhaps. You must be tired. He nodded slowly, eyes gleaming. Let us meet in the morning. He retrieved his gloves and moved to the door. Before he left, he paused, glancing back. I'm proud of you, he said, in a voice that almost sounded genuine. Then he was gone. When he had disappeared, Sansa stood there for a long moment, exhaling the breath she'd been holding. A swirl of conflicting emotions roiled in her. She had once hoped Petyr Baelish would be her savior, delivering her from the horrors of King's Landing. Instead, she had found herself a prisoner of his ambitions. And now she was on the verge of breaking free, of forging her own fate. But she had to be careful, for he was cunning beyond measure. The next move had to be precise. The following days were a delicate dance. Petyr resumed his position as Lord Protector, handling official documents, summoning the Lords of the Vale to reaffirm his authority. Yet Sansa quietly noticed how certain lords now looked to her for guidance. They approached her privately, discussing concerns or offering suggestions, seemingly bypassing Petyr. He sensed it too. She could see it in the fleeting shadow in his eyes, the slight edge in his smile when he realized that, in his absence, she had grown from a sheltered girl into a political force. Matters reached a head when Petyr called a small council to discuss renewed unrest among the mountain clans. Lord Royce, Lord Belmore, Lady Waynwood, and Sansa were among those present. Robert Arryn, as usual, was physically there but mentally adrift. The discussion began with Petyr presenting a plan for more aggressive patrols funded by an increase in taxes on Gulltown's merchants. Lord Grafton, who had come to represent Gulltown's interests, grew irritated. You place too heavy a burden on trade, Lord Grafton argued. The merchants will take their business elsewhere if we demand too much. Gulltown has many rivals on the narrow sea. Baelish smoothed his mustache in a practiced gesture, feigning sympathy. I understand your concern, my lord, but security is paramount. The Vale must remain safe from these raiders. A slight increase. Pardon me, Sansa interjected softly, but has any attempt been made to negotiate with the mountain clans or to ascertain their current strengths and weaknesses? Perhaps a more strategic approach might be taken. Instead of burdening Gulltown alone, the cost could be shared among all Vale lords, given that security is a collective concern. She spoke in a calm, polite tone, but her words carried a firm undercurrent. Lord Grafton brightened at the suggestion while the others exchanged glances. Petyr regarded her with that slight, thin-lipped smile. She had effectively countered his plan. But he did not openly contradict her. Lord Royce nodded in agreement. Yes, let each of us bear part of the cost proportionate to our revenues. And perhaps we can send envoys to the clans who might be open to parley. Some of the clans have been known to ally if treated fairly. Petyr cleared his throat. A noble idea, though not all clans can be reasoned with. Lady Elaine, you are quite bold to suggest such negotiations. But if Lord Royce and the others concur, we can explore the possibility. He did not refute her, but Sansa could see the cool calculation in his eyes. She had undermined him in the presence of the other lords. That would not be forgotten. By the meeting's end, they had agreed to form a committee to assess the cost distribution for patrolling. Sansa would be part of it, along with Lord Royce and Lady Waynwood. Petyr ceded the point gracefully enough, but tension crackled in the air. The lords departed with nods and bows, leaving Petyr, Sansa, and Robert in the council chamber. Robert had begun nodding off in his seat. The door closed behind the last departing lord. Petyr turned to Sansa, that smile lingering on his lips like a blade's edge. My sweet Elaine, he said, voice almost affectionate, you have quite a knack for these matters. One might almost think you were born for it. She gave him the mildest of smiles. If I overstepped, I beg forgiveness. I only meant to find a solution that would satisfy everyone. Overstepped? He shook his head. Nonsense. I welcome your input. In fact, I find it most illuminating. He paused a moment, then added, perhaps we might speak privately later about your newfound confidence. The Vale can only benefit from such a partnership. She inclined her head. Whenever you wish, my lord. Robert gave a small, sleepy moan, indicating he was quite done with the meeting. Petyr ushered him out gently, leaving Sansa behind in the chamber. She stood near the table, her heart pounding. Each day, the confrontation inched closer. She felt sure Petyr would attempt to reassert control soon, possibly by reminding everyone that she was merely Elaine Stone. She had to stay one step ahead. As the door closed behind him, she steadied her breathing and began making her plans. That evening, she sent word to Lord Royce requesting a quiet audience. He arrived after dusk, escorted by a single guard, and followed Sansa into one of the smaller sitting rooms that overlooked the eastern sky. The room was empty except for a few chairs and a table bearing a single lantern. She offered him a cup of mulled wine, which he accepted. They stood facing each other in the lantern's glow, the flicker reflecting in his serious eyes. "I trust you have something delicate to discuss," he said, setting the cup aside. Sansa nodded. "I do. I will speak plainly, my lord. I believe the Vale deserves a ruler who cares truly for its people. Robert Arryn is young and fragile, and Lord Baelish, his interests do not always align with the Vale's well-being." Royce considered her words. "Many suspect as much, but Baelish holds power. And you, my lady, appear to be in his confidence." She met his gaze steadily. "He trusts that I am dependent on him. But I am not. In truth, I have every reason to doubt him. My mother was Lady Catelyn Stark. Lord Baelish once professed great devotion to her, but his actions have not honored her memory. He uses me as a pawn, my lord, and I have grown weary of it." She let a pause settle, allowing that revelation to sink in. Royce's eyes widened, then narrowed in thought. He had known Catelyn Tully in her youth, as the Tullys were not strangers to the Vale. "So you are not Elaine Stone," he said quietly. "You are Sansa Stark." She inclined her head. "Yes. I ask you to keep that knowledge secret for now. It could be dangerous if Baelish realizes the truth has spread, or if certain enemies in King's Landing take notice. I have no desire to see the Vale entangled in that drama. But I can no longer abide Lord Baelish's manipulations. The Vale is strong, honorable. It should not be a tool in a schemer's hand." Royce exhaled slowly. "Lady Sansa, that changes much. Your father was an honorable man, and I hold the Starks in high esteem. I have suspected Baelish of foul play in the past. Lisa Arryn's death did not sit well with me, the abrupt marriage and the rumors surrounding it." Sansa bit her lip. "He confessed to me that Lisa's death was an accident, but I fear it was no mere slip of the hand. He is dangerous, and he aims to rule through Robert until it suits him to do otherwise. We must not let that happen. The Vale should stand on its own, or under someone who truly respects it." Royce studied her face. "Do you intend to claim the Vale as your own? You are a Stark, and the Vale has not typically been ruled by a Stark." She looked away, her voice softer. "I claim no inheritance here, but I am the heir of Winterfell as far as I know. I seek safety and justice. If the Vale's lords would stand with me, we could ensure that Robert is kept safe but not used. Baelish's hold can be loosened. All I ask is that I not be returned to King's Landing or delivered to the Lannisters. I have known too many betrayals already." Royce's expression hardened. "You will not be betrayed by me. If you are truly Sansa Stark, you have the loyalty of Yohn Royce. But we must proceed carefully. Peter Baelish has the ear of many lords. We need proof of his treachery." She nodded. "I have letters, sealed with his mockingbird, that reveal his attempts to siphon money from the Vale's treasury into private accounts. He aims to buy Sells-words, I believe, to fortify his position. I can show you these letters. If presented at the right time, it could sway the other lords." Royce's jaw tightened. "I will gather those of us who are wary of Baelish. For now, keep your head down. Let him think everything is normal. When the time is right, we will act. You have my word, Lady Sansa." She gave a small bow of gratitude. "Thank you, my lord. I have faith in your honor." They parted in secrecy, with Royce slipping away into the corridors. Sansa remained in the sitting room, the lantern's light casting long shadows. She felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. At last, she had taken a step toward freedom from Baelish's grasp. But this was only the beginning. The days ahead would be fraught with danger. If Peter discovered her plan prematurely, he would move against her without mercy. As the scheme advanced, Sansa felt both a mounting dread and a fierce determination. At night, she sometimes lay awake, recalling the dark days in King's Landing, Joffrey's cruelty, the forced smiles, the humiliations. She thought of her mother and father, of what they would want for her. She vowed she would not fail them again. The Vale was her refuge, but also her crucible. She would emerge stronger, or not at all. At length, the day arrived for the final confrontation. Lord Royce quietly rallied several other lords who had grown tired of Baelish's machinations. They agreed to gather in the high hall of the Eyrie under the pretense of discussing winter preparations again. Peter had little suspicion, though he must have sensed a chill in the air. The lords arrived armed, some with retinues, but that was not unusual in a land as precarious as the Vale. Robert Arryn sat on the high seat, looking frail and uneasy. Sansa stood beside him, dressed in a formal gown of grey-blue, reminiscent of Winterfell's colors, her hair braided and bound with silver. Peter took his place at Robert's other side, wearing the fine garments of a Lord Protector, mockingbird brooch gleaming. The tension was palpable as the meeting began. Lord Royce spoke first, welcoming the assembled houses. He then motioned to Sansa. She stepped forward, her heart hammering, but her voice remained steady. "My lords, we have called you here under the authority of Lord Robert Arryn to address concerns about the governance of the Vale. Lord Baelish has worked tirelessly to protect young Lord Robert, but new information has come to light that demands our attention." Peter's eyes flickered. "What new information might that be, my dear?" His tone was smooth, but there was a hint of ice beneath it. She lifted her chin. "That certain funds belonging to the Vale have been diverted into private accounts controlled by Peter Baelish. Here is the proof." She held out the incriminating letters. Royce and Waynwood's stewards stepped forward, displaying corresponding ledgers. Murmurs rose among the lords, some outraged, some stunned. Peter's face was a mask, betraying nothing yet. He spread his hands in feigned surprise. "My lords, I can explain. Any funds were invested in trade expeditions meant to bring profit back to the Vale. Yes, I used private accounts for convenience, but it was never an act of theft." Royce looked unconvinced. "You did not inform us of this. And the sums are substantial. Enough to hire an army of Sel's words." Peter narrowed his eyes. "An exaggeration. Perhaps some mistakes were made, but—" Sansa took a breath. "My lords, there is more." The hall quieted, all eyes on her. She removed a ring from her finger, a small piece Baelish had given her once. "I am not who you believe me to be. I am Sansa Stark, daughter of Eddard Stark, rightful claim to the north. Peter Baelish hid my identity to use me for his own ends." Gasps erupted. Whispers raced through the hall. Sansa Stark, still alive, hidden all this time. Robert Arryn twisted in his seat, looking frightened and confused. Peter's face finally changed, his composure cracked, replaced by something like anger, though he quickly tried to mask it. "This is quite the revelation," he said softly. "Lady Sansa, you know the dangers of revealing yourself. The Lannisters, the crown, do you wish to place the Vale in jeopardy?" Royce spoke up, voice firm. "We will not be threatened by the Lannisters. The Vale stands on its own. Lady Sansa has as much right to seek refuge here as any child of a noble house. But Lord Baelish, we will have an accounting of your dealings." Sansa pressed the advantage. Lord Baelish was behind the deaths of several key figures who stood in his path. "My Aunt Lisa Arryn died under suspicious circumstances. He played a role in the downfall of my family. He means to control the Vale for his own ambitions. I can no longer stand by silently." The accusations flew like arrows. Peter tried to deflect, citing his role as a protector and blaming others for misunderstandings. But the lords had grown weary of his half-truths and manipulations. One by one, they voiced their suspicions, old grudges, and resentments. Lord Belmore recalled the high taxes. Lady Waynwood recounted the attempts to sway her household with bribes. Grafton mentioned the unscrupulous trade deals. Lynn Corbray smirked in the background, a hand on Lady Forlorn as though deciding whether to draw steel. Finally, Royce stood tall, addressing Robert Arryn. "My lord, Peter Baelish has abused his station. We, the lords of the Vale, will not tolerate this betrayal. We ask that he be removed from his position as Lord Protector and answer for his crimes." Robert was trembling, eyes darting. He looked to Sansa as though seeking guidance. She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder and spoke softly. "Robert, the Vale is yours to lead. We only wish to protect you from those who would use you." Baelish took a step forward, eyes locked on Sansa. "Sansa," he said, the single word laden with warning. "Think carefully. Everything you have now is because of me. Betray me and the Vale will turn on you when they see what game you truly play." She met his gaze without flinching. "I learned your lessons well, Peter. You taught me how to maneuver, how to see the lies beneath the surface. And you taught me never to trust anyone blindly. It's time for you to face the consequences of your own actions." A flurry of movement followed. Royce signaled his men and they surrounded Baelish. He started to protest, but swords were drawn. One of the knights seized him by the arm. Lynn Corbray took a step forward, hand gripping Lady Forlorn's hilt, though it was unclear whose side he was on until he relaxed and stepped aside with a theatrical sigh, letting the knights handle it. Baelish fought to maintain a veneer of dignity, but his face betrayed his fury and fear. Robert, despite his nerves, managed a quavering statement. Lord Baelish must answer for his crimes. His voice cracked, but it carried enough authority to end the matter. As Peter Baelish was led away, he cast one last glance at Sansa. His lips curved into a smile, a dark, bitter thing. "You are truly your mother's daughter," he murmured, then vanished behind the line of knights. Sansa stood there, breathing unsteadily, feeling a strange mixture of triumph and sorrow. He had once been the only one who offered her a thread of salvation. But that thread was woven into a snare. Now she was free of it. The hall buzzed with shocked conversation. Lords approached Sansa, some kneeling, others bowing, offering their thanks for exposing Baelish. Many addressed her as Lady Stark now, though she insisted they keep her identity discreet for the moment. The Vale had effectively turned against Peter Baelish, detaining him under guard. A formal trial would follow. For now, Robert Arryn's guardianship would be delegated to those who had earned the Vale's trust, chief among them, Yohn Royce. Once the commotion subsided, Robert tugged on Sansa's sleeve. He looked small and fragile on the high seat. "I'm scared," he whispered. "He said he was my friend." She felt a pang of sympathy for the boy who had lost mother and father, left in the care of a manipulator. "It will be all right," she said gently. "You have people who truly care about you now." He nodded, tears shimmering in his eyes, but he did not break down. She could see that in his own way Robert Arryn was trying to be brave. She gave his hand a comforting squeeze. Over the next few days, Baelish was confined to a tower room while the Vale's lords convened a tribunal. Sansa provided testimony showing the letters and recounting the details of his plans. Royce, Waynwood, Grafton, Belmore, and others all weighed in. Evidence mounted. Baelish continued to proclaim his innocence, claiming he had acted in the Vale's best interest, that Sansa Stark was lying to save herself, that the letters were forged. But it was no use. The lords saw through the contradictions, and too many had experienced his manipulations firsthand. Finally, they reached a verdict. Peter Baelish would be stripped of his titles and exiled, or worse, executed. The tribunal debated which punishment was fitting. Some, like Belmore, demanded his head. Others, like Lady Waynwood, suggested sending him across the narrow sea so he could not harm the Vale further. Sansa did not relish his death, but she feared that if he lived, he would find a way back. A lifetime of cunning would not vanish simply because the Vale cast him out. In the end, it was Robert Arryn who made the decision. In a moment of clarity, the boy lord declared, "He tried to control me and he betrayed my mother. He should die." It was a chilling statement, delivered in a trembling voice, but it sealed Baelish's fate. Even if Robert was young and prone to fits, he was still Lord of the Eyrie, and the tribunal respected his declaration. Before the full assembly, Peter Baelish was led out to the moon door, that infamous aperture in the floor that opened to the dizzying drop below. He stared at Sansa one last time, something conflicted flashing in his eyes. "Do you truly hate me so much, Sansa?" he asked, voice raw. "After all I've done for you? I gave you a way out." She felt tears burn at the corners of her eyes, but she kept her stance firm. "I hate what you did, how you used me. You taught me to see the worst in people, and maybe that saved my life. But you also taught me to stand on my own. This is the consequence of your choices, Peter." A guard moved to push him, but Peter jerked free for a second, letting himself fall through the moon door with a twisted smile still on his lips. His body vanished into the sky, swallowed by the clouds. The hall stood in stunned silence, the only sound Robert's labored breathing. Sansa stared at the moon door, feeling strangely hollow. She knew this was necessary, that his manipulations could not continue. Yet a part of her felt the echo of all the horrors and lessons that had led to this moment. When the door was closed again, there was a collective exhalation. Baelish's hold on the Vale was ended. The lords looked to Sansa, some with gratitude, others with newfound curiosity. Who was this young woman who had unmasked the Lord Protector himself? She could sense the shift in the air, respect mingled with caution. She had proven her ability to navigate the dangerous game of politics. She would need that skill now more than ever. In the days that followed, Sansa devoted herself to ensuring a stable transition. Robert Arryn remained the nominal lord, but the real work fell to a newly formed council that included Royce, Waynwood, and Grafton, among others. They sought Sansa's advice regularly, and she offered it with the same thoughtful care she had developed. Winter loomed, and the Vale needed strong leadership to weather the coming storms. Sansa's main priority became safeguarding the region's unity and seeing to Robert's well-being. She had no illusions that he would ever be a warrior lord or a cunning statesman, but under the guidance of honorable lords and with her gentle encouragement, he might yet grow into a capable figurehead. One crisp morning, she walked the battlements of the Eyrie alone, save for a single guard who trailed at a respectful distance. Snow had begun to fall more heavily, veiling the peaks in white. The wind was fierce, tugging at her cloak. She looked down into the mists below, remembering that Peter Baelish had fallen into that abyss. The knowledge brought her neither joy nor regret. It simply felt like the resolution of a dark chapter in her life. She lifted her gaze to the horizon, where the bright winter sun illuminated the mountains' ridges like silver daggers. She thought of Winterfell, her childhood home, battered by war and ruin. She wondered if her sister Arya still lived, if Jon Snow truly remained Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, or if rumors of his fate were true. The North seemed distant, yet always in her heart, pulling her like a magnetic force. For the moment, though, her life was entwined with the Vale's fate. That evening, the lords gathered once more for a feast, this time a genuine celebration of their new unity. The hall was warmed by great fires, and the mood was lighter than Sansa had ever known it. Laughter mingled with the clink of cups. She wore a gown of deep gray velvet with subtle wolf motifs embroidered at the sleeves in homage to her Stark heritage. The lords rose when she entered, bowing in greeting. She took her seat beside Robert, who seemed more relaxed than usual, smiling at the lively music played by the minstrels. Lord Royce offered a toast. To the Vale, may it stand strong. And to Lady Sansa Stark, whose courage helped us shed the shadow of Peter Baelish. A chorus of assent rose, cups lifted high. Sansa felt a blush touch her cheeks. She stood, raising her own cup of spiced wine. My lords and ladies, I thank you. I owe my survival to the Vale's hospitality, and I vow to repay it with all my strength. May our alliance remain firm through winter and beyond. They drank, and the feast continued. Dancers filled the floor, spinning in colorful garments. Servants brought platters of roast fowl, pastries, and steaming vegetables. The sweet aromas mingled with the smokiness of the hearth. Sansa caught snatches of conversation all around, rumors of movements in the Riverlands, speculation on the doings of King's Landing. Yet overshadowing all was a sense of relief and hope that the Vale was free from the manipulative web Baelish had woven. As the night wore on, Sansa slipped outside to a smaller terrace, seeking a brief moment of quiet. She leaned on the balustrade, feeling the night air's chill. Above her, the moon shone bright, illuminating the snow-capped peaks. The music from the hall drifted out in muted notes. Footsteps approached. She turned to see Lord Royce, who paused a polite distance away. Lady Sansa, he said gently. I wanted to say your father would be proud. Tears pricked at her eyes. Thank you, my lord. I hope he would approve of what I've done. Royce nodded. Ned Stark stood for honor, for doing what was right, no matter the cost. That is a rare quality. The Vale has gained a great ally in you. She offered a soft smile. The Vale welcomed me when I had nowhere else to go. I will not forget that. He placed a hand over his heart in salute. Should you ever seek to reclaim your northern birthright, I expect many in the Vale would march at your side. Our knights remember the bond between House Arryn and House Stark. With that, he gave a respectful bow and returned to the feasting hall, leaving Sansa alone again. She turned her gaze back to the moonlit sky. One day, she might indeed try to reclaim her home in the north if Winterfell stood at all. But for now, she was content to remain here, ruling in all but name, guiding the Vale toward stability. She was no longer the frightened girl who had arrived, desperate for protection. She had become something else, a leader, a survivor, a Stark. In the weeks that followed, she fully stepped into the role of guiding the Vale's governance alongside Robert's official position and the Council's oversight. Through letters, she reached out to other regions, forging alliances that might help the Vale if winter grew harsh. She corresponded with distant lords who had once known her father, carefully concealing her identity from those who might betray her. Yet her network of confidants grew. In time, the Vale's resources were secured for the cold season. Mountainside granaries were filled, trade routes protected, and the mountain clans quelled or swayed into uneasy truces. Traveling merchants found the roads safer than they had been in years. The small folk of the Vale felt more confident that their needs would be met, that the Eyrie stood watchful over them. Sansa made sure Robert took part in ceremonial functions so the people would see him, but she quietly handled the real decisions. Lord Royce and others supported her, and a subtle, almost unspoken consensus grew that she was the force holding the Vale together. Some whispered that she should become Lady of the Vale outright, but she gently dissuaded such talk, not wanting to provoke suspicion from outside forces. Robert remained the figurehead, and that was enough for now. She also increased her interactions with the servants and guards, ensuring they felt heard and valued. She recalled how her father once took time to understand the people under his care. These small gestures humanized her in their eyes. Soon, she became a beloved presence, not just among the nobility but among the ordinary staff who kept the Eyrie running. Rumors of her true identity spread in quiet corners. But those who guessed she was a Stark held their tongues out of loyalty or fear of retribution from the council. Occasionally, she still dreamed of the old life, of Winterfell's courtyards, of running through the snow with Arya. She would wake with tears on her pillow, wondering if she would ever see her siblings again. Yet she knew that in a world torn by war and political strife, the best chance of reuniting with them was to remain strong and stable where she was. The Vale had become her bastion, a place from which she could grow her influence and eventually, perhaps, reclaim the North. One crisp morning, she rode out to the Gates of the Moon, the lower castle at the base of the mountain path. The air was cold enough to sting her cheeks, but she found it refreshing. Lord Royce accompanied her, along with a small group of knights. They passed through snow-dusted pine forests and steep switchback roads, halting near a vantage point that overlooked the Vale in all its winter splendor. Sansa inhaled the scent of pine and frost, her heart stirred by the beauty below. Rolling valleys, icy rivers, and distant villages lay under a blanket of white. Royce dismounted and approached, gazing out alongside her. "It's a magnificent sight," he said quietly. "Sometimes I forget, amid the politics, how grand the Vale truly is." She nodded, smiling. "Yes, it feels like a realm apart, guarded by the mountain's embrace. I understand now why the Arryns loved it so fiercely." They stood in companionable silence, watching hawks circling in the bright winter sky. Sansa felt an odd serenity. For the first time in a long while, she was not constantly bracing for danger. The Vale was far from perfect, and new challenges would always arise, but the immediate threats had been contained. She had a measure of control over her destiny. She breathed in the cold air, letting it fill her lungs, imagining the swirling breeze carrying her father's spirit, her mother's love, the memory of her siblings. At length, Lord Royce returned to the others, leaving Sansa a moment longer to herself. She closed her eyes, recalling every step that had brought her here: the terror of King's Landing, Joffrey's torment, the loss of her father, the uncertain alliance with Peter Baelish, the harrowing confrontation that ended with his death. All of it had shaped her, forging a steel in her heart she had not known she possessed. She was no longer the naive girl who dreamed only of songs and chivalry. She was a leader in her own right, determined to guide her Vale, through winter and beyond. Turning back to her horse, she mounted gracefully. As her entourage began the ride down to the Gates of the Moon, she allowed herself one last glance at the Eyrie perched high above. Its pale stone towers gleamed in the bright light, a beacon among the peaks. She was its caretaker now, a Stark by blood and, in many ways, an Arryn by circumstance. The Vale recognized her authority, and in return she gave it stability, fairness, and the promise of a future unclouded by deception. In the months that followed, Sansa proved her capabilities many times over. She worked with the council to ensure no lord felt sidelined, balancing concessions to keep each house content while fortifying the Vale's defenses. She continued to learn from Royce and Waynwood about the intricacies of the Vale's customs. She oversaw the training of new knights and the improvement of roads. She established better communication between the Eyrie and the scattered mountain villages, dispatching ravens with instructions and receiving reports in turn. Slowly, a sense of unity solidified. When winter deepened, roads became less passable, but the Vale was prepared. Grain stores were ample. Gulltown's port saw shipments of salted fish and goods from Essos thanks to trade agreements Sansa had helped negotiate. Snow blanketed the realm, and the nights grew long, but no one starved or froze without aid. Word spread quietly that the Lady of the Eyrie, though she did not claim the title, was wise, gentle, and firm, a far cry from the manipulative hand that once held power. Robert Arryn, for his part, found relief in the new order. He had never wanted the burden of deciding everything, and now he trusted Sansa and the council to guide him. He grew calmer under the maester's care, and though his health remained delicate, he faced fewer bouts of hysteria. Sometimes he would join Sansa in small tasks, hearing the petitions of minor knights or welcoming traveling singers. She encouraged him, never pushing too hard, helping him stand on his own 2 feet just enough to bolster his confidence. In turn, the boy lord grew attached to her, seeing in her a protective older sister. As winter's grip tightened, there came no urgent crisis, no immediate threat, for the Vale was sheltered from the worst of the kingdom's strife. Sansa seized the calm as an opportunity to solidify her position. She penned letters to distant allies, carefully reinforcing the notion that the Vale was stable and neutral, open to trade and alliances but hesitant to embroil itself in further warfare. She heard rumors of skirmishes in the Riverlands, rising tensions in King's Landing, and uncertain whispers about the north. Yet none of it directly touched the Vale, at least not yet. She remained vigilant, knowing that the tides of power could shift abruptly. One night, as a fierce snowstorm battered the Eyrie, Sansa stood in her chambers, gazing into the flames of her hearth. She thought of the Stark words, "Winter is coming." Now it was here. But she had made a home in this lofty fortress, turning adversity into advantage. She was not naive enough to think her trials were over. The Game of Thrones was ongoing, and new players would emerge. But for the moment, she had found a place where she could rule, quietly, compassionately, and effectively. A soft knock sounded on her door. "Come in," she called. A servant entered, bowing low. "My lady, a raven arrived." The messenger said, "It's urgent." She took the scroll and thanked him. Breaking the seal, she scanned the contents. It was from an old ally of her father, a certain northern bannerman who claimed to hold tidings of Jon Snow, her half-brother, or perhaps cousin, as rumors sometimes suggested. Her heart fluttered at the mention of Jon's name, a piece of home calling to her. The letter hinted that the North was in turmoil, that the Bolton's grip was weakening, that many lords would welcome a Stark returning to claim Winterfell. But that was a perilous road. If she stepped away from the Vale now, would she lose what she had built? She folded the letter carefully, eyes flickering with conflicted emotion. She thought of the North, of her father's legacy, of all the memories Winterfell held. Then she thought of the Vale, the people who had placed their trust in her. Torn between two worlds, she resolved to bide her time. The North had been her cradle, but the Vale had become her proving ground. She could not abandon it on a whim. If she moved toward the North, she would do so with the support of the Vale's knights, forging an alliance that might restore House Stark to its ancestral seat without leaving chaos behind. Setting the letter aside, she let out a sigh, feeling the future's pull. She had come so far, from a frightened girl fleeing King's Landing to the effective ruler of this mountainous haven. Now, another chapter beckoned, the possibility of reclaiming her birthright. But she would move carefully. She would keep the Vale strong, for it was the foundation upon which she could stand tall. Outside, the storm raged, wind howling like a wolf's cry. Sansa stood at the window, unafraid of the winter's fury. She was a Stark of Winterfell, tempered by trials, guarded now by the Vale's heights. She felt the power within her, the confidence she had earned. Come what may, she would face it with the wisdom she had gained. Here in the Vale, she was no longer prey to the cunning of others. She had learned to spin her own webs, and she would use that skill to protect those who depended on her and, perhaps in time, to reclaim the North that had birthed her. For now, she watched the swirling snow, and in it she saw not a threat but the promise of what she could achieve, standing as she did on the threshold of destiny, determined to guide her own course at last. Sansa gazed at the letter for a long while, the firelight dancing across the parchment. The words about the North tugged at her heart. She thought of Jon, once her brother, now rumored to be a Targaryen's ally or perhaps even something else entirely. The note did not specify enough for her to be sure. She only knew that strife churned in the North, that the Bolton's reign of terror might be faltering, and that many northern lords hungered for the return of a true Stark. The letter hinted that if she set foot there once more, she would not be without friends. But to act prematurely would risk everything she had achieved in the Vale. She let the note slip from her fingers onto the table. The window beyond was thick with frost and snow piled upon the outer sill. The sound of wind battered the thick glass as a fresh storm gathered in the mountains. Leaning back in the high-backed chair, Sansa closed her eyes and let herself be consumed by the swirl of memories, her mother's voice, the courtyard of Winterfell, her father's gentle hand guiding her. She had thought that forging a life in the Vale would be the end of her wandering, but the pull of her ancestral home had never faded. Yet the Vale had become her domain in so many ways. She could not simply walk away from the lords who had placed their trust in her, nor from Robert Arryn, a boy who regarded her almost as a guiding star. At last, she drew a deep breath, rose from the chair, and stowed the letter in a locked chest. She told herself she would think further on it in the days to come. She saw little rest that night, for each time she drifted near sleep, she dreamed of faces she had lost, her father, mother, brothers, and sister. Even Baelish appeared in the half-formed haze of slumber, his mocking smile turned into a grimace as he plummeted through the moon door. She woke with a start just after dawn, the faint gray light of morning filtering in. Another day in the Eyrie beckoned, full of tasks and decisions. She rose, dressed in a warm gown of thick wool dyed a pale blue, and pinned her hair in the looping braids that had become her custom. She wondered what her mother would say if she could see her now, balanced on this precipice between two worlds. She spent the morning reviewing the day's petitions. Those from the mountain villages appealed for supplies, and those from Gulltown demanded a slight relaxation of certain taxes. A traveling group of septons requested shelter along the high road. Everything funneled to her desk as the lords and stewards of the Vale had grown accustomed to her final say. She penned a half-dozen letters, stamping them with the Falcon Moon seal. Often she wondered if she should adopt the dire wolf of her birthright instead, but for now it was safer to rule in the name of House Arryn. She reminded herself that her day of openly claiming Stark might still lie ahead. By noon, the wind outside had risen to a howl and the sky over the mountains had turned white with snow. Robert Arryn sent word that he would not leave his private rooms until the storm passed. Sansa knew that the boy's health made him loathe the chill. So she took her meal in her own small solar, a simple fare of warm bread, a vegetable stew, and spiced wine. Halfway through, she was interrupted by one of the Ares guards, who bowed deeply. "My lady, Sir Michael Refort arrived at the gates of the moon late last night. He seeks an audience, if it pleases you." Sansa recalled Sir Michael as a polite, stalwart knight, one of the lesser sons of House Redfort. She also remembered he had been part of Lord Baelish's retinue once, but had shown little true loyalty to the man. Perhaps he brought news from the Redfort region or tidings from the eastern roads. "Show him to the antechamber," she said, taking a final sip of wine. "I'll join him shortly." She found Sir Michael in a drafty room just beyond the great hall, warming his hands at a brazier. He was tall, with a strong jaw and an earnest expression. As she entered, he turned and dropped to one knee. "My lady," he greeted. "Forgive my early arrival, but I carry urgent tidings." She gestured for him to rise. "What news brings you here in such haste?" He brushed the snow from his cloak. "Word from the Riverlands, my lady, from travelers who passed through Lord Harroway's town before reaching our eastern passes. They say there's renewed fighting near Riverrun and a call for alliances. Some Tully loyalists are trying to wrest the castle from the Freys, or so the rumor goes. And in the north, they say Ramsay Bolton's grip is slipping. Some bannermen of House Manderley and House Serwyn have risen up. Others mention sightings of Lady Arya Stark, although the details are inconsistent." Sansa felt her heart lurch at the mention of Arya. She had not heard a whisper of her sister in so very long that she sometimes feared Arya was lost entirely to the chaos of war. Yet the idea that Arya might be alive filled her with a fierce wave of longing and worry. She fought to keep her composure steady. "Is there any certainty to these tales?" she asked. "We've heard so many rumors before, each with their own illusions." Sir Michael shrugged. "Certain? No. But the travelers are convinced something momentous is happening in the north. They also spoke of your brother or cousin, Jon Snow. There are claims he's left the Night's Watch. Some say he's been named king in the north by certain houses that have rejected the Boltons. It seems madness, but many swear by it." Sansa's eyes flickered with a mix of hope and fear. Jon as king in the north? It sounded impossible, and yet he was Eddard Stark's son too, regardless of the complexities swirling about his birth. If the Northern Lords were truly rebelling against the Boltons, that changed the landscape. The Vale Knights had the power to tip such a conflict if they chose. Yet she had to balance that possibility against the risk. Would the Vale Lords stand behind her if she pushed for open intervention? She nodded to Sir Michael. "Thank you. You've done well to bring me this news. You must be tired from the road. Please, take your rest at the Eyrie for as long as you need. If you have any further details that you recall, speak to me again." He bowed, relief evident on his face. "You are most gracious, my lady." Then he straightened. "If I may speak freely, my father has always held the Starks in high regard. Should you choose to take any action regarding the north, House Redfort would be honored to aid you." Sansa recognized that he was venturing onto dangerous ground. There was a time not long ago when declaring fealty to the Starks openly would have drawn the wrath of the Crown or the Boltons, but the world was changing. Maybe the Vale truly would stand behind her as the rightful daughter of Eddard Stark. She dismissed him with a kindly word, and he left, leaving her alone in the antechamber with her thoughts roaring as loud as the wind outside. She then requested a meeting with Lord Yon Royce, knowing she could trust him more than anyone else in the Vale's leadership. By late afternoon, after the storm had let up a little, they met in a smaller council room near the top of the eyrie, where windows overlooked the swirling clouds that clung to the mountainsides. A brazier filled with hot coals fought off the worst of the cold, and the faint smell of burning oak drifted in the air. She explained what Sir Michael had shared. Lord Royce stroked his thick gray beard thoughtfully. "Rumors of Jon Snow's defection from the Night's Watch have reached me as well," he admitted. "Whispers carried by merchants who passed the bloody gate. Some say he declared war on House Bolton, others say he was murdered by his own men and rose again. There's no end to the tales. You know how stories spread, each less believable than the last." Sansa frowned, remembering that the Night's Watch forbade any brother from taking a side in the realm's politics. If Jon had truly abandoned his vows, it must have been something dire, or perhaps the rumors simply twisted whatever had happened. "Regardless of what's true or false, it seems the North is in chaos," she said. "Bolton rule was always a tyranny. If the northern houses have found a new leader in Jon, or in someone else, they might overthrow the Boltons for good." Royce gave a grave nod. "And that would be justice for the horrors inflicted upon the North. The question is, what role do we in the Vale play? We have only recently stabilized after removing Baelish. Many of our lords might be cautious about any entanglement, especially if it pits us against the Crown or the Lannisters." Sansa paced near the brazier. "I know. Yet House Arryn and House Stark have a bond stretching back centuries. We parted ways after Robert's rebellion, but the ties still linger in the hearts of many. If the North is truly seeking a Stark and I am here, how can I ignore it?" She took a steadying breath. "But neither can I lead the Vale into ruin. If I call the banners, we must be sure the cause is just and that we have a chance of success." Royce nodded, respect in his eyes. "You have gained the Vale's trust, Lady Sansa. Most lords will heed your counsel if you present it persuasively. Should you decide to go north, you'll need an army or at least a show of force. I dare say we have the men to help you reclaim Winterfell if that is truly the ambition." Sansa turned to the window, looking at the swirling white. "Winterfell," she murmured, the name tasting of bittersweet longing. "I've dreamed of returning so many times. The idea of it being held by the Boltons is an abomination. But I must know more about the situation before taking that step. If there is truth to the rumor that Jon has already rallied some houses, perhaps I could coordinate with him. But how to reach him without revealing my plans to the whole realm?" Royce eyed her. "There is a path, though treacherous. The mountain passes that lead beyond the Vale can take you north through the eastern foothills. You might avoid the worst roads, though it would be a journey fraught with dangers, bandits, storms, uncertain loyalties in the Riverlands. But we can arrange a small party, one that draws little attention. If you feel you must see for yourself, we can manage it quietly." Sansa considered the notion of traveling in secret, leaving Robert Arryn under the guardianship of the Vale's council in her absence. It would be a risky move, but perhaps the only way to gather first-hand knowledge without summoning all the Knights of the Vale just yet. She turned back to Royce. "Let us think carefully. If we dispatch envoys on my behalf, or if I go in person, we must have a reason that won't arouse suspicion from the lords who remain cautious about fighting a war outside the Vale." Royce agreed. "Yes. I'll speak to Lady Waynwood and Lord Grafton, sounding them out quietly. If they are supportive, we could arrange to provide a small traveling escort. Officially, we can say you're making a pilgrimage to some of the eastern border shrines, checking on the conditions of the roads. A few of our knights can accompany you. By the time the rest realize you're heading north, you may have already crossed out of the Vale." Sansa let the thought sink in. It felt daunting. To leave the fortress that had become her stronghold and venture into a realm consumed by war. Yet the longing for Winterfell burned deep. If Arya was truly alive, if Jon was truly mustering an army, how could she remain idle here while her home was at stake? "I will consider it," she said at last. "But the moment I decide, we must move quickly. The snows will make the passes nearly impassable soon." Royce bowed. "Of course, my lady. I stand ready to help in any way I can." They parted with mutual respect. Sansa remained alone near the brazier, mind whirling with possibilities. Should she remain in the Vale, safe but distant from her family's battles, or ride out and risk everything for a chance to reclaim her heritage? The question tormented her for the rest of the day and well into the night. Whenever she closed her eyes, she saw Winterfell's towers crowned in snow, the old god's tree in the godwood, and the crypts where her ancestors slumbered. She awoke from fitful dreams more determined than ever. Within a few days, she quietly reached her decision. She would go north in person, not to declare open war on the Boltons just yet, but to see for herself who was still loyal to House Stark and whether Arya or Jon might be found. The Vale would not be left leaderless. Robert, along with the council, would guide it. Sansa had planted enough seeds of stability that she trusted the region would not collapse overnight. She confided her plan to Lady Anya Waynwood and Lord Grafton, both of whom expressed concern but ultimately gave their support. Both reaffirmed that House Arryn had a historic bond with House Stark, and if that bond could be renewed, it might strengthen the entire northern half of Westeros. Thus, a small party was assembled in secrecy. It would consist of Sansa herself, though she would travel incognito under a modest name for part of the route, Ser Michael Revfort, who had volunteered to guide them through certain lesser-known passes, a half-dozen loyal Vale Knights, and a few trusted servants. Lord Royce handled the logistics, preparing fresh horses, provisions, and a handful of ravens in sealed cages so that Sansa could send messages back to the Vale if needed. Lady Waynwood provided cloaks lined with thick fur to help withstand the brutal cold. They decided to leave under the cover of early morning before the rest of the castle was fully stirring. On the appointed day, Sansa rose well before dawn. She donned a simple traveling gown beneath layers of wool and fur, braided her hair into a neat coil that she tucked under a hood, and carefully packed the few letters she deemed most important, proof of her identity, in case she needed it. She penned a brief farewell to Robert, explaining that she was inspecting border outposts to ensure the Vale's continued safety. She left instructions for him to trust the council in her absence and to remain calm. A swirl of guilt tugged at her, for Robert was so dependent on her presence. But if all went well, she would return and, with luck, bring new allies. As the sky began to pale, she slipped through the corridors to the courtyard where the small band awaited her. The men spoke in hushed voices, checking saddles and straps in the torchlight. The breath of the horses billowed in the icy air. Ser Michael, clad in a dark cloak, saw her approach and inclined his head respectfully. "Everything is ready, my lady. The route to the Bloody Gate should be clear enough. Beyond that, the roads become more hazardous." She nodded, her heart pounding. Though she had traveled great distances before King's Landing to the Vale, once upon a time, this felt different, a deliberate step into the unknown, with no illusions. She mounted a sturdy chestnut mare, grateful for the warmth of the cloak and the presence of armed knights around her. Lord Royce stood by, offering her a final farewell. "The roads are treacherous. Send a raven if trouble arises. The Eyrie will stand behind you." "Thank you," she whispered. Then, without further fanfare, she led the column out of the gates. The biting wind sliced across her cheeks, but she did not flinch. Each hoofbeat echoed against the stone walls until they were beyond the fortress, descending the steep paths toward the lower castle of the Gates of the Moon. By the time they reached it, dawn's first light colored the eastern sky a pale gray. Guards here had been informed of inspection orders. They saluted Sansa's party with minimal curiosity, and the group pressed onward, slipping into the swirling snows of the Vale's high roads. Though they traveled quietly with as few banners as possible, word could still spread if they encountered travelers along the way. Snowdrifts and shifting winds made progress slow, and at times the roads narrowed to precarious ledges along the cliffs. Sansa remained silent much of the time, focused on guiding her mare carefully, each moment aware of the drop that yawned beyond the trail's edge. The knights took turns scouting ahead, ensuring that no mountain clans lurked in ambush. They spent several nights huddled in small mountain inns or the halls of lesser lords who had not yet realized the true purpose of Sansa's journey. In these lesser halls, Sansa introduced herself simply as a high-ranking attendant from the Eyrie. Ser Michael quietly confirmed the story, making reference to castle inspections. Suspicion was minimal, for most folk were too concerned with the deepening snows and the scarcity of food. Sansa was relieved that Peter Baelish's demise had severed many of the old network threads that might have betrayed her. If Baelish were still alive, she could imagine him sending spies to dog her every step. The days dragged on in a blur of white landscapes, swirling winds, and the steady plod of hoofs. Sansa's body ached from long hours in the saddle, and the relentless cold gnawed at her even beneath layers of fur. Yet a part of her felt more alive than she had in a long time. She was no longer behind castle walls but out in the wide world, acting on her own behalf. Each day brought her closer to the north and to whatever waited there. Eventually, the mountains relented into lower hills, and the travelers came upon the outskirts of the riverlands. The transition was stark. The rocky passes gave way to rolling countryside dotted with bare trees and icy streams. Here, the signs of conflict were more visible. Burned farmhouses, broken fences, and the occasional mound of earth that might have been a makeshift grave. They passed refugees trudging south or east, ragged families seeking safer land. Sansa's heart clenched at the sight, and she wondered how many had suffered under the endless churn of war. At one crossroads, they encountered a band of armed men who eyed them warily. Ser Michael led their group forward, announcing they were Knights of the Vale, escorting a messenger on official business. The men, who wore no clear sigil, though one carried a battered banner of House Tully, allowed them to pass after a brief exchange of words. Sansa overheard enough to gather that these were men loyal to the Tully cause, hoping to liberate Riverrun from the frays. They did not question her too closely. When the group stopped to make camp that evening, Sansa huddled near the fire, stirring a thin stew. Her mind replayed the conversation with the men at the crossroads. If pockets of Tully loyalists still fought, did that mean her mother's family might eventually reclaim their ancestral seat? Riverrun had fallen to the frays through treachery. She thought of Edmure Tully, her uncle, rumored to be a hostage. Catelyn Tully's memory weighed heavily on her, fueling her own sense of responsibility. The Riverlands were in as much need of stability as the North. She turned to Ser Michael, who was tightening the straps on a bundle of supplies. "How far do you think we are from the next set of border towns?" 2 days' ride, perhaps, he answered. "Once we reach the main road that leads west toward the Twins, we'll have a choice. We can angle north to avoid crossing near the Raise strongholds, or we can gamble on the more direct route. The snows might not be as heavy on the main road, but it's riskier. Fry patrols could be watching." Sansa gazed at the map they had, pinned down by a rock beside the flickering lantern. "The last thing we need is to attract the Frey's attention. They'd be all too eager to capture any highborn travelers, especially if they suspect a link to House Stark or Tully. Let's aim north and avoid them. Winter might slow us, but so be it." Ser Michael agreed. They plotted a course that cut through lesser-known villages and half-abandoned hamlets, navigating carefully around major roads. This way was longer and involved fording icy rivers and crossing broken ground where muddy tracks were frozen into jagged ruts. Several times, the horses nearly lost their footing, but the Vale Knights helped guide them with skill. Sansa grew accustomed to the constant sting of cold on her cheeks and the dull ache in her thighs from so many hours riding. On the 18th day since leaving the Eyrie, they neared a small settlement known as Greenford, if the map was to be trusted. Smoke rose from a cluster of huts, a sign that people still lived there. Yet as they approached, they found it almost deserted. A lone woman stood outside one hut, wrapped in a threadbare cloak, eyes wary. She looked at the armed knights with open fear until Ser Michael raised a hand in peace. "We're just travelers," he called out. "We seek warmth and news." The woman nodded stiffly and gestured for them to tether their horses near a rickety fence. Sansa dismounted, feeling the blood rush back into her legs painfully. She approached the woman with a kind smile. "We mean no harm. My name is Elaine." She used the alias automatically out of habit, though she had set out on this journey in part as Sansa Stark. Still, she did not want to broadcast her identity to every stranger. The woman's face softened slightly. "I'm Barry. My husband was a shepherd. He died last winter." Her voice was hoarse, as if from grief or disuse. "We don't have much, but you can come inside if you like." Inside the cramped hut, the floor was dirt and a small hearth glowed with a meager fire. Sansa and 2 of the knights entered, while the others stood watch outside. Barry ladled out some thin soup, apologizing that she had little else to offer. Sansa thanked her, pressing a few coins into her hand, which made the woman's eyes widen in gratitude. Over the meal, Sansa asked about conditions in the area. Barry's voice shook. "We see few travelers nowadays. Everyone's afraid of the Freys, or the outlaws, or the cold. We've heard rumors that Lord Bolton is losing his grip up north. Some talk of a Stark girl who escaped him. Others say the bastard of Bolton hunts her still." She sighed. "I can't say what's true. But folk here have had enough of warlords and their cruelty. We just want to survive." Sansa's fingers tightened around the wooden bowl. She recalled the brutality of the Boltons and how they had flayed men, the stories that still haunted the realm. If there truly is a Stark girl who escaped, do they say where she might be? Barry shrugged. "Some say she fled south. Others that she wanders the hills near Winterfell. We've heard so many contradictory tales. But I think a new wind is blowing. Men are less afraid of Bolton's flares. Maybe it's just the season, but it feels like the old lines are shifting." Sansa exchanged a glance with Ser Michael. It was possible the rumors were about Arya or about herself. Or both. If Arya had been captive in Winterfell, the idea of her fleeing into the wilderness filled Sansa with dread. Had her sister truly returned to the north only to become a hunted creature? They thanked Barry and departed, leaving her with the rest of the coins they could spare. Outside, the knights reported a sense of unease among the handful of villagers they had encountered. None seemed keen on discussing the larger state of the war. Weariness and hunger overshadowed all else. So the party pressed on, forging northward again. The snows thickened with each passing day. Sometimes they found shelter in an abandoned barn or the ruin of a farmhouse, building small fires to ward off the freezing nights. Sansa often thought back to the comfort of the Aerys' thick walls and roaring hearths, but she refused to regret her choice. Each step north felt like a step closer to her father's spirit and to the closure she had never found since leaving Winterfell so long ago. Eventually, they reached a stretch of rolling land that marked the southern boundary of the Neck. If they crossed it, they would be at the doorstep of the north. But the Neck was known for its marshes, bogs, and hidden perils, especially in winter. Travel there was always precarious, and the presence of House Reed and their crannogmen made it even more uncertain for strangers. Still, the alternative was to circle east or west at great length, risking run-ins with major houses that might or might not be friendly. During a halt at the edge of a frozen fen, Ser Michael consulted with Sansa. "My lady, the route north through the Neck could be even slower than the path we took in the Vale. With these bogs half frozen, we risked the horses breaking through ice into mud. There's also talk of outlaws or Ironborn reavers. I can't be sure of our safety." She considered his warning. The idea of turning back was unthinkable. Going around the Neck would take weeks they did not have. She exhaled, breath visible in the frigid air. "We'll have to make do. We'll proceed with caution. House Reed has long been loyal to the Starks. If we encounter them, perhaps they'll help us. If not, we keep a low profile." So it was decided. They pressed into the murky land where the trees grew thick with dangling moss. The ground alternated between frozen stretches and patches of half-thawed marsh that threatened to swallow a horse's legs. The wind carried a different scent here, earthy, decaying vegetation, layered with the tang of open water. The sky hung heavy with clouds, turning early dusk even darker. On the second day in the Neck, they encountered a small crannogman patrol. 5 men emerged silently from the shadows of the swamp, their faces streaked with mud, each carrying a short spear and a round shield of wicker. The Vale Knights hastily formed a protective semicircle around Sansa. But the crannogmen did not advance aggressively, they simply watched with guarded expressions. One of them spoke, voice low and lilting with the accent of the marshes. "We do not often see Vale Knights venturing this far north. Have you lost your way?" Ser Michael answered diplomatically. "We travel on behalf of the Aerie with peaceful intentions. We intend to pass through the Neck to reach the north. We mean no harm to House Reed or any loyal to them." The crannogman's dark eyes flicked to Sansa, who had lowered her hood slightly. "And who is this lady so well guarded in such a harsh land?" Sansa considered for a moment. Was it wise to reveal herself here? House Reed was famously loyal to the Starks, but these were uncertain times. She made a decision and spoke. "I am Sansa Stark," she said quietly, "daughter of Eddard Stark. I come in search of family and to learn the truth of the North's plight. If you serve House Reed, then we are allies." A ripple of surprise passed through the crannogmen. Their leader studied her intently, then inclined his head. "Lady Stark," he said with a touch of solemnity. "We know your father's name well. Lord Howland Reed was his friend. If you truly are who you claim, you will find welcome at Greywater Watch." Relief surged within Sansa. She had gambled by speaking openly, but it seemed to be the right choice. "I would be grateful for House Reed's assistance," she replied. "We have been traveling a long time." He nodded curtly. "We can guide you, though Greywater Watch is elusive. Follow our lead and your horses will not sink into the marsh." The crannogmen turned to the Vale Knights. "Stay close and do not stray from the path. We have ways of traveling here that outsiders do not." Though some of the knights wore skeptical expressions, perhaps uneasy at trusting strangers in such a treacherous land, they recognized the logic of accepting help. Together, their party set off, now under the guidance of the crannogmen. True to their word, these marsh dwellers knew precisely which areas of ice could bear weight and which were a deadly trap. They led the group around hidden pools and carefully across narrow causeways of firm ground. More than once, Sansa felt her mare's hooves slip in the mire, but the crannogmen would wave them to safer footing. By dusk, they reached a small cluster of huts built atop stilts in a shallow lake, connected by a maze of wooden walkways. Dozens of crannogmen peered from half-hidden vantage points, some perched in the trees, others leaning over railings with spears ready. In the center rose a modest wooden hall, torchlight glowing from within. The structure looked as though it might shift at any moment. Indeed, Greywater Watch was rumored to move, avoiding detection. Once inside the hall, they were greeted by several figures in reed-woven cloaks. Though Sansa's father had once told her tales of Howland Reed, she had never met him and she did not see him now. Instead, an older woman with gray-streaked hair emerged. "I am Mira, daughter of Lord Howland," the woman said, her voice surprisingly soft. "My father is away attending to urgent matters in the deeper marsh. But I welcome you in his name, Lady Sansa Stark." Sansa blinked in astonishment. She had heard of Mira Reed when she was a child, some mention of her father's old companions. She hadn't known that Mira would be older now, hardened by the swamp. "Thank you, Lady Mira," she said, unsure how to address her precisely. "Your guidance is a blessing." Mira gestured for them to sit near a long table where a simple meal of fish stew and black bread was served. Though plain, it was hot and filling. Once everyone had settled, Mira turned to Sansa. "We have heard rumors of your escape from the Lannisters and then from Baelish. Word reaches the Neck, though often in fragments. We rejoice that a daughter of Eddard Stark lives." Sansa felt a mix of warmth and sorrow. "Thank you. I never imagined I would pass through the Neck in such a manner, but the realm has grown so dark and full of strife. I seek news of my family, particularly my brother Jon Snow and my sister Arya." Mira's expression grew thoughtful. "Your brother, we have heard that he was Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, then betrayed or perhaps killed, though now rumors claim he lives again. Some insist he has rallied an army with the wildlings to march against Ramsay Bolton. I can't speak to which version is true, but there have been battles around Winterfell. Fires were seen in the sky. We also heard that a young woman was with him, some say his sister, others claim it was a wildling spear wife. The stories are muddled." Sansa's heart thudded. If it truly is Arya, she dared not finish the thought, lest she hoped too strongly. "And what of Rickon, my youngest brother? Is there any word?" Mira shook her head. "We've heard no mention of Rickon. We do know House Umber once claimed custody of him, but it is uncertain which side the Umbers have chosen in this turmoil. The Boltons have forced many northern houses into reluctant allegiance. But if any small folk have glimpsed Rickon, it has not reached our ears." Sansa forced herself to remain calm. One glimmer of hope was better than none. "Thank you for what you can share. Is House Reed openly supporting any cause yet?" Mira paused. "My father is cautious, for the Boltons hold Winterfell through fear. But we remember our oaths to House Stark. If a clear chance to restore the Starks arises, the Crannogmen will do their part. We have not forgotten the old days. My father fought beside Ned Stark. He taught us loyalty above all." Sansa felt relief blossom. "Then, if I journey further north, will your people guide me beyond the Neck? The roads are perilous, and the snow grows worse." Mira studied her for a long moment. "Yes," she said at last, "if you are resolved to go. But if the Boltons sense you are near, they will hunt you. Be warned. Ramsay is cunning and cruel beyond measure. Some say he keeps hounds trained to track those he seeks. If you ride openly, you risk capture or death." Sansa's voice hardened. "I've faced cruelty before. I will face it again if I must. But I have a small group of loyal knights from the Vale, men who will not abandon me. And I know these lands, even if not as well as you do. I will not be turned aside." Mira offered a faint, respectful smile. "You are your father's daughter indeed. Very well. Rest here tonight. We will prepare supplies to see you through part of the journey. Some of our scouts can guide you to the outskirts of the territory around Moat Cailin. Beyond that, the open north awaits." Sansa nodded gratefully, exhaustion weighing heavily on her. But a spark of determination flared within. She was almost there, on the cusp of her homeland. The Vale Knights, for their part, seemed astonished that they had found such hospitality in this secretive domain. They ate quietly, content to let their lady handle the diplomacy. Ser Michael looked relieved that the Crannogmen welcomed them, while the rest exchanged small nods, as if silently affirming their dedication. That night, Sansa slept in a small wooden alcove that swayed gently, as if the very ground of Greywater Watch shifted beneath her. She thought she could hear the water lapping beneath the stilts. Despite the strange motion, she felt an unexpected sense of peace. Memories of Winterfell flickered in her mind again, and for once they did not fill her with dread or sorrow. She dreamed of walking through the Godswood and seeing the red leaves swirl. When she woke in the early hours, she realized tears wet her cheeks. She brushed them away, sat up, and prepared herself. Soon she would stand on northern soil, truly returned to the land of her forebears. The next morning, Mira Reed led them to a hidden causeway that weaved through thick marshes, crossing icy streams and small islands of firm ground. 2 younger crannogmen accompanied them as scouts, flitting ahead with uncanny silence. The Vale Knights had to lead their horses carefully, sometimes dismounting when the footing became too treacherous. Yet through it all, Mira pressed forward with an easy grace, as if the bogs were an extension of herself. Sansa marveled at the skill. She felt grateful for this alliance she had not anticipated. At midday, they paused on a raised hummock where the land sloped upward. A cluster of gnarled trees overlooked a wide expanse of frozen marsh. Beyond that rises Moat Cailin, Mira said, gesturing north. The ruins are held by a small garrison loyal to the Boltons, I believe. But they may not be prepared for travelers coming from the deeper swamp. If you skirt the edges carefully, you can pass west and avoid the fortress. Once beyond, you'll be truly in the north, with Winterfell about a week's ride, longer in the snow. Sansa felt an ache in her chest at the proximity of her old home. Only a week or so away. It felt both impossibly close and dangerously distant. Thank you, she told Mira. House Reed's kindness will not be forgotten. Mira nodded. May the old gods guide your steps. I will remain here in case my father returns soon. He will want to know you passed through safely. If you reach Winterfell or the remnants of your brother's forces, tell them the crannogmen stand ready. Give them my name. It might win you an ally or 2. Sansa inclined her head in gratitude. A part of her longed to beg Mira to come as well, to stand beside a fellow child of Eddard Stark's friend. But she understood that the Reeds had their own responsibilities. She offered a final embrace, which Mira accepted, then parted ways. The 2 younger crannogmen would continue as guides for half a day, then return to Greywater Watch. Sansa and the Vale Knights pressed on, the path ahead no less dangerous but now illuminated by the sense that allies watched from the swamps. Late that evening, they beheld the silhouette of Moat Cailin's ancient towers in the distance, rising against a sky streaked with the last glow of sunset. The fortress was more ruined than castle, built upon the only solid ground in a vast sea of bogs. It had once been the key to defending the north from the south, but the centuries had not been kind to it. Still, a garrison loyal to the Boltons or the Iron Throne might watch from the remaining strong walls. Sansa resolved not to linger. They skirted the marsh's edge, traveling under the cover of darkness. Twice they heard voices echoing over the water, and once they saw a torchlit patrol across the bog, but they avoided detection. By dawn, they emerged onto firmer ground north of Moat Cailin. Fog clung to the lowlands and ice crusted the pools. One of the crannogmen scouts led them to a final patch of dense trees, then halted. We go no farther, he said in a hushed voice. Follow that ridgeline north for a while, then bear east where the land is higher. You'll avoid the worst of the swamps. Ser Michael offered thanks, and Sansa did too. The crannogmen nodded once, then melted back into the shadows, vanishing so swiftly it seemed like sorcery. Sansa looked around, noting how the air felt different here. Colder, sharper, as though the spirit of winter itself resided in the north. This was her ancestral land. She could almost feel the presence of her father's memory in the wind. They pressed onward. For the first day, the terrain was a mixture of wooded areas and frosty plains. The traveling remained laborious, slowed by snowdrifts. The knights kept watch for wild beasts or roving foes. They saw no one, only the prints of wolves in the snow, which made Sansa's heart flutter. Wolves had always roamed these woods, though dire wolves were said to be rarer. She thought of her lost wolf, Lady, and the heartbreak that still lingered in her chest. On the second day, they encountered a small farmstead nestled by a half-frozen stream. The house was empty, door ajar, furniture coated in dust and snow blown through the cracks. It seemed abandoned. Outside, the skeleton of a cow lay half-buried, gnawed by scavengers. Some tragedy had befallen the inhabitants, or perhaps they had fled south. Sansa said a quiet prayer to the old gods for whoever had lived there. Further north, the land began to rise in gentle hills, dotted with stands of pine. The wind whistled through the branches, scattering snow in swirling eddies. Occasionally, the knights glimpsed movement in the distance, perhaps other travelers or maybe outlaws. But none approached. On the 5th day since crossing Moat Cailin, they made camp in the lee of a rocky outcrop. While the knights gathered firewood, Sansa climbed the outcrop to get a better look at the horizon. She stood atop the rocks, the freezing wind biting at her cheeks. The sky was gunmetal gray, heavy with the promise of more snow. In the far distance, she could just make out a shape that might be the broken line of a castle's towers. Winterfell? Or perhaps some lesser keep? She could not be sure. She felt a surge of emotion. So close now. It had been years since she'd last laid eyes on her family's seat. If it truly stood, if it had not been reduced to total ruin by the Boltons or the war, she might see it again in just a few days. That night, around the campfire, the knights talked softly among themselves. The topic of the Boltons came up again. The men recalled horrific tales of what Ramsay had done to prisoners. Another knight spoke of rumors that the Karstarks might have joined him or might have turned against him, depending on which story you believed. No one was entirely sure. Sansa listened in silence, fear swirling in her gut. The Boltons had seized her home by betraying Robb Stark. She thought of the Red Wedding's echoes, the memory of her mother and brother slaughtered. If Ramsay Bolton still held any power, he would not let a Stark reclaim Winterfell easily. On the 6th day, they encountered the first tangible sign of conflict, footprints in the snow leading away from what looked like a battleground. Broken weapons and half-buried corpses littered a small clearing between stands of pine, all crusted with frost. The knights spread out cautiously, swords drawn. Sansa kept a hand over her mouth as she caught sight of the gruesome remains, a dozen or more men, some wearing the sigil of House Bolton, the flayed man, on their cloaks. Others were clad in plain leathers or battered armor, no obvious sigil. The fight had clearly been savage. There was no sign of survivors. Wolves, muttered one knight, pointing at the tracks of large paws around several bodies. Sansa shivered. Wolves might have fed on the dead, or else they had attacked mid-battle. She could only imagine the terror. Ser Michael and a few others checked if any wounded man still breathed, but found none. The snow had half covered the fallen, preserving them in eerie stillness. At last, Sansa steeled herself and moved closer to look for any identifying tokens. Most of the men wore no heraldry beyond the Bolton sigil, or else none at all. Was this a skirmish with outlaws, or a rebellious band of northern folk? She could not tell. The only thing certain was that a battle had been fought here recently. They moved on, hearts weighed down by the sight. The realization that Bolton patrols roamed the countryside made it even clearer that caution was necessary. The group traveled by less obvious paths, veering away from open roads. Sansa insisted on pressing forward, though she felt fear coil inside her. Each mile brought them deeper into a land contested by scattered forces, none of whom likely expected to find Ned Stark's daughter returning with a handful of Vale knights. On the 7th day, they passed a small holdfast that had been burned, the blackened timbers still faintly smelling of smoke. Sansa's anxiety built with every ruin they saw, wondering if Winterfell lay in the same condition. But she refused to let despair take root. Instead, she held onto the possibility that her family might still be out there, that the northern bannermen who loved House Stark might rise to defend her. She had to believe in that, or this entire journey would become hopeless. Finally, near dusk, one of the knights who had ridden ahead as a scout returned in haste. "My lady," he reported, voice tight with urgency, "there's a camp just over the ridge. A large number of tents and banners. I saw men wearing the sigil of the dire wolf, the Stark sigil." Sansa's heart leapt, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Did you see any sign of the Boltons?" "No, my lady. The banners I glimpsed were the wolf's head, the horned moon of House Hornwood, and possibly the merman of House Manderley. They seemed battered, as if from recent battles, but they were definitely not Bolton men." Her mind raced. If these truly were Stark loyalists, who commanded them? Could it be Jon? Or another northern lord claiming the Stark name in her absence? She urged the knight to lead them closer, albeit cautiously. As twilight gathered, they moved through thick stands of pine until they could see the faint glow of a large encampment in a shallow valley. Torches dotted the perimeter, and the outlines of horses and wagons were visible. Sansa felt her breath catch in her throat. The banners of House Stark, her father's banner, floated in the wind, ragged but unmistakable. She could hardly believe it. If those men truly rallied behind the dire wolf, then perhaps the stories of Jon or another claimant were true. She swallowed hard, conscious that a misstep here could be deadly if these were pretenders or if they mistrusted her. But she could not turn away. She had come too far. She instructed the knights to keep their weapons sheathed and form a peaceful approach. Ser Michael volunteered to ride ahead with a white cloth to signal parley. Sansa pulled her hood low over her brow, her heart hammering. She followed at a short distance, flanked by the Vale Knights, until the camp's sentries noticed them. Shouts rang out. Armed men formed a line, torchlight gleaming off steel. Ser Michael called out that they came in peace, bearing Lady Sansa Stark. There was a long pause, as if the defenders scarcely believed what they heard. Then a figure stepped forward, a tall man in worn plate armor, the Stark sigil on his surcoat. "You dare name the Lady Sansa Stark?" he demanded, voice thick with suspicion. Who among you can prove this? Sansa nudged her horse closer, pushing back her hood so the torches illuminated her face. I am Sansa Stark, she said loudly, though her voice trembled. Daughter of Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell. I come from the Vale, seeking my family. Another hush, broken only by the moaning wind. The men exchanged startled looks. Then the tall man barked an order. More soldiers rushed over, crossbows lifted uncertainly. Sansa kept her posture calm, praying they would not unleash bolts in panic. A younger knight stepped forward, peering at her face in the flickering light. His mouth fell open. Gods be good. She does look like a Stark. The tall man's suspicion melted into wonder, though he kept a firm grip on his sword. Lady Sansa, if it is truly you, I beg your forgiveness for the rough greeting. We've had word of impostors, and the Boltons love their tricks. If you truly are Ned Stark's daughter, the lords will want to see you at once. Then take me to them, Sansa said, relief flooding her that they had not attacked. I mean no harm. My knights are loyal to me. Nodding, the tall man motioned for some of his fellows to escort them into the camp. Tense silence followed as they wound past rows of tents, where tired soldiers huddled around fires, some wounded, some hunched in gloom. They stared at Sansa with startled eyes, whispers rushing through the ranks. Is that her? The Stark girl. In the torchlit gloom, she saw men with bandaged arms, half-frozen peasants, and even a handful of women cooking over a large cauldron. These were the remnants of an army battered by winter and battles, yet clinging to hope. She thought she recognized a few faces, perhaps men who had once served at Winterfell in her youth, though she could not be sure in the dim light. At last, the escorts led her to a larger tent near the center of the camp. 2 burly guards stood watch. The tall man who had first confronted them ducked inside, presumably to announce her arrival. Sansa exchanged a glance with Ser Michael. He squeezed her arm reassuringly. She felt a rush of gratitude for the Vale Knights who had come so far with her. Then the tall man re-emerged, beckoning her to enter. She stepped through the canvas flap into a space lit by lanterns. The tent was cold despite the rugs on the ground, but it offered some shelter from the wind. 2 men stood near a makeshift table strewn with maps. One was older, heavy-set, with a lined face and a thick beard shot with gray. Lord Wyman Manderley, if she recalled his description correctly. The other was younger, though he bore scars across his cheek and wore a cloak trimmed with wolf fur. She blinked, trying to place him, and then she saw, just beyond them, the figure who stood partially turned away, studying her as if afraid to believe his own eyes. Jon. He looked older than she remembered, thinner, his dark hair longer. His eyes filled with a tired sorrow she had never seen in him before. He wore simple garments of black and gray, as if he had never quite left the Night's Watch behind. Across his shoulders, though, was a fur cloak that might once have belonged to their father. He stared at her in silence, every muscle tense. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Sansa? He whispered, voice hoarse. Is it you? She felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes. All the fear, the weariness of the journey, the years of separation. It surged into a single moment. Jon, she managed, stepping forward. It's me. I'm here. He crossed the space in 3 quick strides, enveloping her in a fierce embrace that drove the breath from her lungs. She buried her face against his chest, clinging to him as though he were the only solid thing in a world of shifting shadows. The warmth of his presence, the familiarity of his arms. She realized she had not embraced any family since her life fell apart. She let out a soft sob and he stroked her hair gently as if to reassure himself she was real. Behind them she heard the others stirring in amazement. Lord Manderley murmured something that might have been a prayer. The younger scarred man stepped back with a respectful dip of his head. No one intruded on their reunion. When at last they pulled apart, Jon cupped her face in his calloused hands, searching her features. I feared I'd never see you again. They told me you were in King's Landing, then lost, then married to Tyrion Lannister, then vanished with Baelish. So many stories. I didn't dare hope. She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. I escaped. It's been a long journey. I heard rumors that you'd left the Wall, that you might be rallying the North against the Boltons. I had to come. I couldn't stay away. He nodded, expression grave. Much has happened. Too much to tell in a single breath. But you're here now. That's all that matters. He looked to the Vale Knights who had followed Sansa inside. And these are your protectors? Sir Michael bowed stiffly. Sir Michael Refort, sworn to Lady Sansa's service. We bring greetings from the Lords of the Vale and stand ready to aid the rightful rulers of Winterfell. Jon blinked, then let out a breath that sounded half in awe. Aid from the Vale? We could use every sword. We're battered, Sansa. Ramsay Bolton holds Winterfell and his forces outnumber ours. But we have some alliances, Lord Manderley here, Lord Glover, the Hornwoods, a handful of others. We hoped for more from the Umbers or Karstarks, but we don't know where they stand. We've fought skirmishes. We've lost good men. Sansa's heart clenched at the mention of Ramsay. She reached for Jon's arm, her voice trembling. I've heard the stories of him. He's monstrous. We can't let him keep Winterfell. Father's spirit would never rest. Jon nodded. Agreed. We plan to march on Winterfell once the snows lessen enough for open battle, but so far we lack the numbers to guarantee victory. If you bring Vale Knights and if we can rally more northern houses. Lord Manderley stepped forward, clearing his throat. My Lady Stark, he said in a deep, rumbling voice. It warms my old heart to see another child of Ned Stark returned. We have waited too long to cast out the Boltons. With your arrival and the help of your Vale companions, we might finally achieve it. Sansa turned to face him, recalling that Manderley had once visited Winterfell when she was a little girl, though she barely remembered. She curtsied slightly. Lord Manderley, I am grateful for your loyalty. I bring a small force from the Vale for now, but if we send word to the Eyrie, we can muster more. We simply needed to see if there was a real chance to reclaim the North. Manderley's eyes gleamed. By the Seven, or the old gods, we will make a chance. Winterfell must belong to House Stark once more. The younger scarred man nodded. Roderick Riswell, he introduced himself quietly. My family splintered when the Boltons rose. I fight with Jon Snow now, but we need every sword. He paused, glancing at Sansa. Your presence could sway many reluctant lords. They might rally to a true-born Stark daughter. Jon shifted uncomfortably as if reminded of his own questionable birth status. Sansa squeezed his hand. They should rally to you as well, Jon. Your father's son. He let out a tired breath. Some do. Others see me as a deserter of the Night's Watch or a bastard playing at lordship. But seeing you, they'll see that House Stark isn't gone. We stand together. Sansa felt tears threatening again, but she steadied herself. Then let's plan. Let's send word to the Vale, to the other houses. Let them know I'm here with you. We'll gather enough men to drive Ramsay out of Winterfell. A flicker of hope lit Jon's eyes. We can try at least. We have time to prepare. Winter is harsh and the Boltons can't march far either. We might strike before they expect it. Lord Manderley thumped the table decisively. You've been trying to lure the Boltons out from behind their walls. Now, with Lady Sansa as bait, that might do it. Or we gather in force and lay siege to them. Whatever we do, the men will fight harder knowing there's a true Stark in camp. Sansa nodded, mind reeling at the sudden rush of possibilities. She had come north for answers and found them and more. Her brother was alive, leading a ragtag army, and they needed her. She thought of the Vale Knights, how they could tip the balance if the rest were summoned. Yet the campaign to retake Winterfell would be no simple feat. Ramsay Bolton was infamous and the castle walls were formidable, even half damaged. But hope flared, stronger than her dread. As the evening wore on, Sansa sat with Jon and the northern lords, listening to the accounts of battles fought, houses gained or lost, the shape of the conflict. The Vale Knights gathered in another part of the tent, exchanging updates with northern soldiers. Outside, the temperature plummeted, wind howling, but for the first time in years, Sansa felt truly warm in her heart. She was home, or near enough to home that it no longer felt like a distant fantasy. While poring over a map of the region, Jon placed his hand on hers gently. I'm so sorry, he murmured, voice choked with emotion. For everything you endured. King's Landing, Joffrey, Baelish. I wish I could have protected you. She squeezed his hand in return, tears threatening. None of us could have known how dark it would become. I survived, Jon. We both did somehow. He nodded, his dark eyes shadowed with old pain. We'll make it right, he said softly. We'll free Winterfell from the monsters who took it. And we'll remember our family the way they deserve. Sansa looked into his face, seeing a man who had lost so much. Killed by his own men, if rumors were true, and brought back to fight again. She believed the stories now, seeing that haunted cast in his gaze. They were both survivors in their own ways. Yes, she whispered. We'll make it right. Together. They poured themselves into plans until exhaustion forced them to rest. Jon insisted that Sansa take his tent, he would find space elsewhere or sleep with the men, but she refused, not wanting to displace him. In the end, they compromised. She would take a smaller partitioned area and he'd sleep in another section of the same tent. It was far from the comforts of the Eyrie, but she felt safer knowing her brother was mere footsteps away. That night, she curled under a cloak on a cot, listening to the muffled sounds of soldiers outside, the crackle of the brazier, and the faint rasp of John's breathing. Despite the chill and the hard ground beneath the thin mattress, she felt a quiet peace. She was with family again, with a renewed sense of purpose. The Boltons' tyranny would end. She vowed that her father's legacy, tarnished by traitors, would shine once more. She would not fail him now. Morning came with a biting wind and a pale sun that barely broke through the gray clouds. The camp stirred, men rubbing their arms against the cold, huddling around fires. Sansa rose early, meeting John by the main brazier. They shared a meager breakfast of oat porridge and hard bread, then began the day's work. First, they had to address the entire camp. News of Sansa Stark's arrival had spread like wildfire overnight. A crowd gathered in the open, despite the cold, eager to glimpse her. Jon stood with her before the men, flanked by Lord Manderley, Ser Michael, and the other northern lords. "All of you have heard the rumors," Jon announced, voice carrying. "Today, see the truth with your own eyes. This is Sansa Stark, daughter of Lord Eddard Stark, rightful Lady of Winterfell." Sansa stepped forward, pulling back her hood. Her hair, braided neatly, spilled over her shoulders. A hush fell. She could see skepticism in some faces, awe in others, and a raw hunger for hope in many more. She lifted her chin, recalling what it meant to be the daughter of a lord who led with quiet strength. "My friends," she said, voice clear despite the flutter in her stomach. "I come from the Vale, where I found shelter after escaping King's Landing and other dangers. I return now to stand with my brother Jon. We are here to reclaim our home and restore peace to the north. I know many of you have fought and suffered greatly. We cannot undo the past, but we can forge a future free of the Boltons' cruelty. I stand ready to share in your struggle." A murmur spread through the ranks. Then a few men, mostly older soldiers, sank to their knees in reverence, tears in their eyes. Others raised their fists and cheered. The sound swelled, an outpouring of raw emotion. One soldier near the front wept openly, whispering something about Ned Stark's memory. Sansa felt tears prick her own eyes, but she held them at bay, standing tall. In that moment, she realized how deeply the North had ached for a glimmer of hope, how the direwolf banner symbolized far more than a single family. It was an embodiment of honor and resilience, and she would do everything in her power not to let them down. Jon placed a hand on her shoulder. "They believe in you." She nodded, voice trembling softly. "They believe in us." Soon after, the camp erupted in activity. Soldiers formed up for drills, some half-hearted but others energized by the news. Northern lords and their retainers converged with Ser Michael and the Vale Knights, exchanging formal introductions. Plans were laid to send out riders bearing news of Sansa Stark's return to as many houses as could be reached, House Serwyn, House Tallhart, and others that might throw off the Bolton yoke if they knew a Stark was here. Sansa wrote letters in her own hand, sealing them with the direwolf stamp Jon had kept. She penned appeals to the Eyrie as well, urging the Vale to rally more men and send them north swiftly. She signed each letter not as Elaine, but as Sansa Stark of Winterfell. Lord Manderley, for his part, pledged to send word to White Harbor to muster additional levies. He described the hardships of winter as well, ships stuck in ice, trade routes disrupted, but the Manderleys had resources and might be able to hire, sell sails, or transport supplies. Each measure was a step toward building a real force capable of challenging the Boltons. Yet the more they planned, the more Sansa sensed the urgency. Winterfell lay only a few days' march away, and the Boltons would not wait idly once they learned of her presence. That afternoon, a ragged group of scouts returned with grim tidings. Bolton riders had been seen prowling near the outskirts of the forest, possibly searching for fugitives or checking the land for possible threats. Word of the camp's location might soon reach Ramsay. Jon pressed the scouts for details, but they had little more to offer. A handful of other men had encountered roving bands loyal to the Flayed Man. Skirmishes might break out at any time. The camp needed to be prepared. A strategy council convened in Jon's tent. Sansa sat beside him, flanked by Ser Michael and Lord Manderley. Various northern representatives were there as well, small lords or knights from houses that had joined. They pored over a map of Winterfell's surroundings, marking Bolton outposts. Winterfell itself, they knew, was still partially damaged from the Ironborn occupation, but the Boltons had been repairing the walls and gates. Ramsay commanded a force rumored to be at least several thousand strong, bolstered by men from the Karstarks and possibly the Umbers, though that was unconfirmed. "We cannot match those numbers in a straight fight," Jon said, studying the map. Not unless more houses rally to us or the Vale arrives with a substantial force. Lord Manderley grunted. I can muster perhaps 500 men from White Harbor if my ships and roads remain passable. But that takes time. We might be forced to fight earlier than that if the Boltons discover our camp. Sir Michael spoke up quietly. If we hold a defensive position, we might negate their numerical advantage. But I understand the cold is just as much our enemy. The men won't last in the open fields. Sieging Winterfell in the dead of winter is no small feat. Sansa listened, her mind churning. A direct assault felt suicidal, but letting the Boltons continue to entrench themselves was equally dangerous. She cleared her throat. Could we lure Ramsay out somehow? Perhaps if he believes the force he faces is smaller than it truly is, or if we stage a feint. If we can force him to meet us on ground of our choosing, we might stand a chance. Jon glanced at her, a faint smile of pride touching his lips. It's possible. Ramsay's overconfident from what I know of him. He might come to meet us in open battle, believing he can crush us easily. If we pick the site carefully, a place where the terrain favors us, our smaller numbers might hold. They discussed various locations: frozen lakes, wooded slopes, or narrow valleys. The challenge lay in ensuring that any ruse would actually draw Ramsay out. He was cunning and cruel, but also impulsive. Perhaps the rumor that Sansa Stark had returned would inflame his desire to prove he could capture her. It was a risky gamble, one that could cost many lives. Eventually, they settled on a plan to move the camp closer to Winterfell under cover of darkness, occupying a defensible ridge near a partially frozen river. They would fortify quickly with wooden stakes and ditches. Then they would send out riders with false information, whispers that the Stark host was smaller and weaker than it really was. If Ramsay decided to strike swiftly, he would find them on prepared ground. If he instead hunkered in Winterfell, they could attempt to besiege him with what forces they had, hoping reinforcements from the Vale or White Harbor arrived in time. Sansa excused herself after the council concluded, stepping outside the tent into the frigid dusk. Fires flickered across the encampment, sending sparks swirling into the dark sky. She looked up, searching for stars, but clouds obscured them. A sense of both determination and dread weighed on her. Soon, they would be at Winterfell's doorstep. Soon, they would risk everything in a bloody confrontation. She thought of Robb, of the tragedy of the Red Wedding, and prayed to the old gods that this time House Stark would triumph, not fall in ruin again. Jon joined her, pulling his cloak tight. His breath billowed in the cold. Sansa, he said softly, I don't want to put you in danger. You've endured so much. Maybe you should stay behind when we face the Boltons directly. She turned to him sharply. No. This is my fight too. Winterfell is my home as much as yours. I won't hide. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right? Just stay near me or the knights who guard you. If we lose track of each other. She placed a hand on his arm. We won't. Not again. She exhaled a shaky breath. Do you ever wonder if father and mother watch from somewhere, judging how we handle this? Jon's gaze flickered. All the time, he admitted. I feel them beside me sometimes, reminding me to do what's right. It's why I can't walk away, no matter how hopeless it seems. She gripped his hand. We will free Winterfell. We'll make them proud. He nodded, though worry lingered in his eyes. Get some rest. We march at first light. She parted from him, heading to her small section of the tent. There, she made a final check of the letters she had penned. She planned to send out ravens at dawn to the Eyrie and to any other allies who might be within reach. Even a few dozen extra knights could tip the balance, and she wanted the Vale's lords to know that Sansa Stark had found Jon Snow alive, that the battle for Winterfell was imminent. She wrote the words quickly, sealing each scroll with wax impressed by the direwolf signet. Carefully, she addressed them to Lord Royce, Lady Waynwood, and others who might answer the call in time. When she lay down to sleep, her thoughts churned with images of battle, of Bolton men with flayed skin banners, of Winterfell's broken walls. She forced herself to imagine a happier ending, the Stark banner flying again over the battlements, the halls warmed by hearths and laughter, Robert's rebellion. It seemed a lifetime ago that her father had told her stories of honorable battles and just kings. The realm had taught her a harsher reality. Yet she had learned to navigate it, to steel herself against betrayal. She was not the timid girl who once dreamt of golden-haired princes. She was Sansa Stark, sharpened by adversity, determined to protect what remained of her family. At first light, the camp roused with quiet discipline. Sansa oversaw the dispatch of the ravens, watching them take flight into a pale sky. Then she helped organize the Vale Knights, ensuring they had enough provisions and understood their role in the coming movement. Many of them had never marched in the deep north before, and the bitter cold tested their endurance. But each man wore the Falcon Moon's sigil with pride, and they had pledged themselves to her. She thanked them all personally, feeling a swell of gratitude. These knights had left the comfort of the Vale's high halls to fight for a cause that was not strictly their own. In the swirling possibilities of Westeros, a new bond was being forged, the Vale and the North side by side. The march itself was difficult. Snow fell steadily, blanketing the fields and forest paths. Riders scouted ahead, ensuring no Bolton patrols lurked nearby. Jon and Lord Manderley led the main host, though they lacked true cavalry in any sizable numbers. The war horses were few, and many were simply hardy northern steeds carrying men who would dismount to fight on foot. Sansa rode with a small guard at the heart of the column. She was not a warrior, and she knew it, but her presence here symbolized the rightful rule of Winterfell. Men cheered quietly when they saw her, as if her mere appearance steeled their resolve. They reached the chosen ridge by midday and immediately began fortifying. The trees and brush provided raw materials for sharpened stakes. Snow was piled into rudimentary ramparts. It was not a grand castle wall, but it might give them a defensive edge if Ramsay chose to attack. Smoke from cooking fires curled into the gray sky as the men set about making camp. Everyone spoke in hushed tones, as if aware that the final confrontation loomed. Sansa helped where she could, distributing bread and salted meat to tired soldiers, offering a kind word. She did not pretend to be a seasoned commander, but she understood morale, she understood the power of empathy, which she had learned in the Eyrie. One soldier, a beardless boy who could not have been older than 14, stared at her with wide eyes. "My lady," he murmured, bowing with clumsy reverence. I never thought I'd see a real Stark again." She knelt beside him, ignoring the cold damp seeping into her skirts. "And I never thought I'd see the North again. But we're both here." She offered him a small smile. "Stay strong. Once Winterfell is free, you and all these men will have a place to call home again." He nodded, tears brimming. She rose, her heart twisting. War forced children to become soldiers, such a far cry from the songs she once adored. Yet perhaps she could help end at least a portion of the nightmare. By dusk, scouts reported Bolton riders in the distance, perhaps advanced scouts of their own, or outriders for Ramsay's main force. The camp braced itself. Jon ordered sentries posted in a wide perimeter. Sansa found herself pacing near the fires, a coil of anxiety in her stomach. She hated this waiting, the sense that an onslaught could begin at any moment. Jon spoke to her, voice subdued. "The Bolton men might probe our defenses tonight. Stay near your guard. If anything happens, find me or one of the lords. Do not wander alone." She forced a nod, though her nerves were fraying. "I won't." Night settled with an eerie hush. Snow kept falling, muffling sound, blanketing the tents in white. From her vantage point near the main fires, Sansa peered into the dark. Torchlight and moonlight revealed shapes moving along the ridgeline, northern sentries, their silhouettes faint. She clutched her cloak tight, trying not to recall the horrors she had heard of Ramsay's methods. Torture, flaying, hounds. She prayed to the old gods that this time the Boltons would be the ones to suffer defeat. Before dawn, horns sounded from the eastern slope. Shouts pierced the cold air. Sansa jolted awake from a half-doze, heart hammering. Jon burst from his tent, sword in hand, his breath visible in the flickering torchlight. "Bolton riders," a sentry yelled, scrambling down the slope. "They're attacking our perimeter." Chaos ensued as men rushed to arm themselves. Sansa quickly found her guard of Vale knights, who formed a protective circle around her. She was ushered behind a line of sharpened stakes. The sky was still dark, but she could see the silhouettes of horses at the edge of the ridge, their riders brandishing weapons. They charged with a thunder of hooves, meeting a hail of arrows from Jon's archers. Screams and clash of steel erupted. Sansa pressed her hand against her mouth, her pulse thrumming with terror. The Bolton riders crashed into the stakes, some horses impaling themselves, others veering aside. Jon and a knot of northern warriors rushed in, swords flashing. She caught a glimpse of her brother swinging his blade with grim determination, felling one rider who toppled from his saddle. Another rider tried to circle around the flank, but the Vale Knights intercepted him. Ser Michael knocked the man off his horse, finishing him with a swift thrust. The fighting was brutal but short-lived. The Bolton riders, outnumbered once they realized the strength of Jon's position, wheeled around and fled into the darkness. When it was over, the ridge was littered with dead or dying horses, and a few of Jon's men lay still. Groans drifted through the cold air. Sansa wanted to help, to do something, but her guard urged her to stay put until the all-clear was given. At last, Jon approached her, panting, blood spattered on his coat. She saw relief and lingering fury in his eyes. "They tested us," he said, wiping his brow. "We held." She nodded, speechless. All around them, men dragged the wounded to the fires. The dead Bolton riders were stripped of anything useful, then piled away from the camp. Jon's men had lost a few, though she didn't know how many. By the time the sky brightened, the ridge wore the scars of the skirmish: broken stakes, churned snow stained with blood, scattered weapons. Yet the Bolton force had been repelled. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. As day broke, new scouts reported that Ramsay's main force was gathering, likely preparing for a larger assault. It would be a matter of hours or perhaps a day before they clashed again. Some men speculated that Ramsay himself might come, hungry to recapture or kill the Stark girl who dared to challenge him. A dreadful hush settled over the camp. Sansa felt each minute stretch, taut with the knowledge that a storm of steel loomed just beyond the horizon. In a lull between war councils, Sansa found Jon near the ridge's edge, gazing out at the white expanse. He looked exhausted, shoulders slumped, eyes haunted. She rested a hand on his arm. "Jon," she said softly, "are you well?" He closed his eyes, took a deep breath. "I never wanted any of this. I'm not a king or a warlord. I was a brother of the Night's Watch, sworn to protect the realm from threats beyond the wall. But I couldn't stand by while the Boltons defiled our home." She gently squeezed his arm. "I know. None of us chose these horrors. But you've done what had to be done, and I'm proud of you. Father would be proud." He opened his eyes, exhaling a shuddering breath. "Maybe," he whispered. "I'm just glad you're here, Sansa. Whatever happens, at least we face it together." She found a fleeting smile. "We Starks have been scattered to the winds for too long." The horns sounded again around midday, echoing across the snowy plain. This time, the signals were more numerous, and scouts rushed back with the report. A large Bolton host was closing in from the east, infantry and cavalry, possibly thousands of men. Ramsay was bringing his might to bear. Sansa felt her heart plunge. The men scrambled to positions, archers knocking arrows, swordsmen gripping hilts with white-knuckled tension. Jon strode through the lines, offering words of encouragement. Lord Manderley and Ser Michael took command on the flanks. Sansa stood behind the center, in sight of the battered dire wolf banners that fluttered in the biting wind. They heard them before they saw them, the low rumble of hooves and the clank of armor. Then, emerging from the swirling snow, the Bolton banners appeared, a crimson field with the flayed man. Sansa felt a stab of revulsion. The Bolton line extended wide, with cavalry on the wings. At their center, a mounted figure advanced, flanked by what looked like bodyguards. Ramsay Bolton? Sansa couldn't see his face from this distance, but she knew it had to be him. He halted his line just out of bow range, as if assessing the ridge. Silence reigned, broken by the restless snorts of horses and the thump of boots. Then a voice carried across the distance, taunting, mocking. Sansa couldn't make out the exact words, but she guessed Ramsay was challenging them to come down, to fight on open ground. Jon refused, holding his men in place on the high vantage. For a tense interval, it seemed the Boltons might wait for a better opportunity. But after some heated movement among their ranks, the entire line began to surge forward, slow at first, then faster. The cavalry angled for the flanks, intending to encircle or break the lines from the sides. "Archers, loose!" Jon roared. A wave of arrows arced overhead, peppering the Bolton foemen. Men fell screaming. Another volley followed, and then the Boltons were close enough that archery lost its advantage. The cavalry thundered in from both sides. Ser Michael's Vale Knights met them on one flank, raising shields to absorb the impact. Steel clashed on steel, and shrieks tore through the air. On the other flank, Manderley's men engaged the riders, axes biting into horses. Chaos exploded in every corner of the battlefield. Sansa backed away, deeper into the lines, as Jon had insisted. She was no warrior, and her being seized or killed would ruin morale. She had never witnessed a battle on such a scale. The swirl of bodies and blades, the screams and the pounding of hooves turned her stomach. Yet she stood with her guard, her eyes scanning for any sign of Jon. She spotted him in the thick of it, blade flashing, fighting alongside men wearing the dire wolf sigil. She prayed the gods would protect him. Ramsay's force was larger, but the ridge and fortifications hindered their cavalry. Many horses crashed into sharpened stakes or stumbled in the uneven snow. Bolton infantry, better organized, pressed forward relentlessly, hacking at Jon's men. The defenders gave ground in places only to rally behind the stakes. Sansa felt her breath come in ragged bursts. Each moment blurred, a confusion of limbs and roars and the awful scent of blood in the cold air. Time lost meaning. She saw Ser Michael unhorsed, fighting on foot against 3 men. She saw a hail of arrows from the Bolton archers strike some of her own. She saw a monstrous war dog leap at a northern soldier, dragging him down with savage jaws. She saw men of the north and Vale fighting shoulder to shoulder, refusing to yield. The clash raged across the ridge, each side surging, then faltering. Finally, the Bolton cavalry on the flanks began to pull back, unable to break the lines. A ragged cheer went up from Jon's men, but it died quickly as the Bolton infantry rallied again, spurred on by fresh reserves. At the center, Sansa glimpsed Ramsay himself, slashing with a wicked blade as he urged his men forward. A wave of fear coursed through her. He was so close to where Jon fought. She yearned to intervene but could do nothing but watch. Then, as if from nowhere, a new horn call echoed across the battlefield, trumpets from the west. The entire ridge seemed to shift as armed riders crested a small hill, banners streaming in the wind. At first, Sansa couldn't identify them, her vision blurred by falling snow. But then she recognized a distinctive sigil among them, the moon and falcon of the Vale. Reinforcements had arrived. She let out a strangled gasp of relief. Somehow, her ravens or earlier messages had reached the area in time. A wedge of mounted knights thundered down the slope, slamming into the exposed flank of the Bolton army. Panic rippled through Ramsay's ranks. The newly arrived Vale cavalry drove a wedge into the Bolton's formation, cutting them off from retreat. The men near Ramsay turned to face this fresh threat, but they were pinned between two forces, Jon's battered host and the Vale riders. Sansa watched the moment the tide changed, the Bolton line breaking apart in confusion. Men threw down weapons, tried to flee. The Vale knights rode them down, steel flashing. The battle turned into a rout. In the chaos, Sansa saw Ramsay, still on horseback, slashing at one of the Vale riders. He cut the man down and spun his horse to retreat, heading toward the open plain. Jon, as if sensing his prey, charged forward through the carnage. He seized a fallen spear, hurled it with all his might. It flew true, striking Ramsay's horse in the flank. The animal screamed and collapsed, sending Ramsay tumbling into the snow. Sansa clutched the arm of one of her guards, her heart pounding. She saw Jon close in, sword in hand. Ramsay scrambled to his feet, eyes wild, pulling out a dagger. Jon lunged, their blades meeting in a flurry of violence. Ramsay hissed something. Sansa could not hear it over the din. She saw his face twisted with a sick grin, even in defeat. Jon smashed aside the dagger, then punched him hard in the jaw. Ramsay went down on one knee. Jon raised his sword again, fury in every line of his face. For an instant, Sansa thought he would end it there, run Ramsay through. Instead, he hesitated, as if wanting Ramsay to face justice, not just the blade in the heat of battle. Soldiers rushed in, some northern, some Vale. They pinned Ramsay's arms, wresting the dagger away. The battle in that moment seemed to crash to a halt around them. Bolton men who had not yet fled simply dropped to their knees or were cut down. Shouts of victory surged through the field. The flayed man banners were toppled, trampled into the bloody snow. The dire wolf rose triumphant. Sansa's guard, seeing that the threat was abating, allowed her to move forward. She picked her way through the carnage, heart-thudding. Bodies lay strewn across the ridge, and she forced herself not to gag at the sight and smell. At last, she reached Jon. His face was drawn, spattered with blood, eyes burning with cold anger. Ramsay knelt before him, hands bound, blood trickling from his broken lip. Despite his defeat, Ramsay smirked, lips curling in that hateful expression. Sansa stared at him and felt a wave of revulsion and loathing. "So you're the girl?" Ramsay sneered, voice slurred. "The little bird who escaped her cage. Thought you could hide forever." Sansa trembled, stepping closer, ignoring the gore underfoot. "You no longer have anyone to torment," she said, voice shaking with emotion. "Winterfell is ours." Ramsay laughed, a harsh, choked sound. "You think you're free? You'll never be free of me." Jon looked ready to strike him again, but Sansa laid a hand on his arm. "No," she whispered. "He must face what he's done. Publicly. Let the North see him undone. Let them see the Bolton's crimes laid bare." Ramsay spat blood onto the snow. "I am still Lord of Winterfell. I am still Warden of the North. Io." He got no further as Jon's fist slammed into his face, cutting him off. Sansa said nothing, only met Jon's eyes, a silent understanding passing between them. Ramsay would die, but not in the heat of battle. He would die with all his sins exposed before the very people he tormented. Jon nodded, breathing hard. Soldiers dragged Ramsay away, ignoring his muffled curses. A hush settled over the field as the realization sunk in. The Bolton army was defeated, their lord captured. A ragged cheer rose from the battered men who had followed Jon and Sansa. The Vale knights who had arrived last moment now dismounted, helping secure prisoners or tend the wounded. Sansa caught sight of Lord Royce among them, his bearded face shining with sweat. He met her gaze with a nod of respect. She felt tears of gratitude welling. They had come, they had arrived in time. Winterfell was within reach. Exhaustion threatened to overtake her, but she forced herself to remain upright. Jon gently clasped her arm. "We've done it," he said, voice raw. "We can march on Winterfell now. The few men left inside will surrender once they learn Ramsay is captured." She nodded, tears slipping free at last. "Winterfell," she echoed. "We're going home." Men cheered around them. The direwolf banners waved in the wind, soaked with melting snow. The cost of victory was high, bodies littered the ground, friends and foes alike. Yet amid the blood and horror, hope glimmered, a phoenix rising from the ashes. House Stark had not perished. Ned Stark's children had returned, and Winterfell's gates, battered but still standing, would soon open to welcome its rightful heirs. In that moment, as Sansa leaned on Jon's arm for support, she felt the weight of her father's memory, of her mother's love, and of every sacrifice that had led them here. For the first time in far too long, she dared to believe that tomorrow would dawn on a Stark-ruled Winterfell and a North freed from tyranny. They would bury the dead, honor the fallen, and rebuild what had been lost. The future remained uncertain, war still raged in other corners of the realm, threats lurked beyond the wall. But today, this day, belonged to House Stark. Sansa closed her eyes against the swirling flakes and let the tears flow, a sob in her throat. She was home at last, and she would never let it be taken from her again.